How many times do you think that Resident Evil 2 has been remade? I can tell you there are a few different answers depending on just how you define a remake. But for the purpose of this video, I will be defining a remake as any retelling of the story that is told within the original PlayStation 1 Resident Evil 2 game. So, with that definition in mind, how many remakes do you think? If you're more of a casual Resident Evil fan, then you may well be saying that there's only one remake. This one. The official remake in 2019. If you've been playing the series for a few years, then, well, you may be saying that there's in fact two remakes. These two. Because it was remade on the Wii. If you've remembered that, if you're one of the few people that have remembered that Welcome to Raccoon City was released in cinemas and on DVD and all that, then you're most likely saying there's three. These three. The most dedicated Resident Evil fans will no doubt remember the SD Perry novelisation and think that there's in fact four. These four. You're all wrong. So wrong. There's been so many remakes of Resident Evil 2. It is ridiculous. Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998 and the first remake came out that very same year on the portable Gamecom system. Now, odds are nobody fucking remembers the Gamecom system, but it was a little portable system that was meant to rival Nintendo's Game Boy series, the Game Boy, Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. It was a budget console that was meant to be the budget option to Nintendo's premium option. And one of the games that the Gamecom got was a version of Resident Evil 2. And while this version is very faithful to the classic game, it is a remake because it shares no assets, no models, no pre-rendered art, nothing is shared between them. The Resident Evil 2 game was entirely remade on the Gamecom. Remade to the point that some of the layouts to the environments that you explore, the RPD and the surrounding areas, are completely different. Some rooms in the RPD are in the same place as they are on the PlayStation 1 version, but they have completely different layouts and, by the looks of them, intended purpose in the RPD. So, it is a remake. It remakes all of the assets, it retells the story, changing some of the environments, and it even changes some of the story points. It is, despite the fact that it came out in the same year as the PS1 version, it is a remake. More of a demake, but still. Now, the second remake would come out a year later, and that was the SD Perry novelisation. This one. Similar to the Gamecom version, this is a retelling of Claire and Leon's escape from Raccoon City. Interestingly, it does feature some changes to the events of the story, moving some events around, adding little details here and there that just tie in better with Perry's earlier Resident Evil novels, and fleshing out other details that would go on to be important in Perry's later Resident Evil novels. Honestly, if you're a Resident Evil fan, I would recommend picking this up on eBay. If you can't for whatever reason, then there is an audiobook on Residents of Evil's YouTube channel, so I'd recommend that as well. Now, we had to wait a full decade for our next remake of Resident Evil 2 until 2009. But then, like buses, two arrived at once. We got Resident Evil Uprising first, and this was an isometric Java demake of Resident Evil 2 for mobile phones of the era. And I've just got to say, I miss when mobile gaming was an exciting new frontier for developers, and not the pay-to-win, catch-ya bullshit that it is today, because mobile gaming just makes me sad now. However, 2009 was a good year because it was only a few months after Uprising that we got our second Resident Evil 2 remake, and that was Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. The Dark Side Chronicles was a light gun shooter for the Nintendo Wii, and it covered the events of not just Resident Evil 2, but also Code Veronica, which is very relevant with the just released trailer for the remake. Oh my god, I'm excited for that. By the way, as I'm recording this, the trailer's just released. So like, I'm really excited about that. But yeah, it retells the events of Resident Evil 2, Code Veronica, as well as an original story that details Leon and Krauser's relationship before the events of Resident Evil 4. Honestly, this is a fun little game, especially if you have 2 remotes and a friend to play with. We would have to wait another 10 years, again another decade, before we got our next remake until the year 2019. And this is the one that you think about when you think of Resident Evil 2 Remake, because it is the most obvious one that the classic PS1 game has received. It is known by most fans as simply Resident Evil 2 Remake. Shockingly, while it's not the least faithful to the original game, it is one of the least faithful, with major events, characters and locations being changed, outright removed, or even altogether added. An example of this would be the orphanage. But we've seen monsters removed as well, like there's no giant spiders in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Where are the giant spiders? What's that all about? Really, honestly, one of the least faithful. I love it. It's a great remake, but it's not the most faithful remake. But in the same year of 2019, we got another remake. And this was the board game for Resident Evil 2, which I do have. Yep, in 2019 we got the second remake of Resident Evil 2 with the board game. Told you I had it. Now this board game used a lot of artwork and character designs from both the remake of the 2019 remake and the original Resident Evil 2. It uses a really interesting blend of artworks in my opinion. However, it's kind of disappointing to say, but it's not the best board game I've ever played. It's fun when you're playing it. The environment's like randomly generated, and you do that by putting like pieces of the board together. But that means that after you finish in one area, you have to stop playing, rearrange the board, and then start playing again. And that it creates this really unenjoyable pacing, in my opinion, which makes it not the best board game ever made. However, if you've got a bunch of fans, Resident Evil fans, then it is some fun with the right group of people, mostly Resident Evil fans. So, you know, if you're a fan of the series, it is a worthwhile curiosity. I know I very much enjoyed getting it for Christmas one year. I think my lovely wife got it for me. No, I know she did, I remember. And yeah, it was a wonderful gift. And it's here that we get to the 7th remake. Welcome to Raccoon City, or as I like to call it, welcome to Raccoon Shitty. Because it's a shitty film. We got this 3 years after the official remake. It released in 2021. Honestly, it's immediately possible to see how much this film takes from the remake compared to how much it takes from the original, because it's basically all remake. That being said, it is just abysmal. It combines the plots of Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3. Now, in all the behind the scenes, they're like, oh, we take the plots of 1 and 2 and we put this and we go, no, it's got the destruction of Raccoon City. That is from 3. You are merging 3 games into one film. And because of that, it skips so much stuff and it's just, oh, it's a mess. The only thing that saves it, in my opinion, are the costume and set designs, because they are to die for. What all of this means is that Resident Evil 2 has 7 remakes over the years. However, that's not enough for me. I need me more Resident Evil 2, baby. So I want to expand my definition. How about, instead of just remakes that tell the story of Claire and Leon's fun day out in Raccoon City, we include any game, film, novel or other piece of media that features any of the locations from the original Resident Evil 2. And we compare all of them together. Suddenly we have a myriad of different games, including, but not limited to, both of the Outbreak titles, Operation Raccoon City, and even the infamous Umbrella Corps. So today, what we'll be doing is looking at how Raccoon City's police department, the surrounding streets, the sewers underneath the station, the train yard on the edge of town, and Umbrella's secret lab, I don't know what all the hand movements are, have been depicted over the last 28 years going through every room, hallway, point of interest and comparing how each game, novel or film brings them to life. Before we start though, I do just need to take a moment to remind you that I'm a small creator, and for small creators like myself, each like, comment, subscription and hype means a lot. So if you enjoy this video, if you want to see more like this, then please just take a little bit of time to interact with my channel and this video. Honestly, it means the world, and it does so much for smaller creators. I mean, it does so much for like all creators, but the smaller ones, each like goes a lot further, each comment goes a lot further, so please, just a little bit of interaction means the world. Thank you. So, without any further ado, let's do further. As we'll be comparing every remake of Resident Evil 2 to the original, I think it's important to define our terms a little first. Now, Resident Evil 2, as I've mentioned, was released on the PlayStation 1 back in 1998, a year that was very long ago, and I am so sad to say I remember. Oh, I'm old. When I say the original Resident Evil 2, this is the version I am referring to. But for the sake of image quality, I will be using footage from the GOG re-release of Resident Evil 2 Classic running on my computer. This version is almost identical, with the biggest differences being the aforementioned image quality, higher resolutions, and the ability to skip loading screen doors. The wider Resident Evil series sees a general change in the accepted layout and visual appearance of Raccoon City and the surrounding areas, with the release of 2019's official remake of Resident Evil 2, as well as the 2020 remake of Resident Evil 3. When I say Resident Evil 2 remake, I am referring to the 2019 game simply called Resident Evil 2. Footage for this game was played on my Xbox Series X and captured via a capture card just so I could get the best quality image. I will also be talking about canon scenarios. When I say Leon A, Claire B, what I mean by this is that Leon's campaign was played first and then Claire's played second. The order in which you play each character's campaign changes the story in subtle but important ways in both the original Resident Evil 2 and its remake. These changes are far more obvious in the original and far more subtle in the remake, but both the original and remake do feature changes in the events of the story depending on the order in which you play them. The accepted canon order for play in the original Resident Evil 2 is Claire A, Leon B. This is because Resident Evil 6 makes it very clear that Sherry was infected by her father William Birkin with the G virus. This only happens in Claire A's scenario, so that has to be canon, meaning the original Resident Evil 2's canon order of play is Claire A, Leon B. However, this was changed with the remake, as based on details from both Resident Evil 4's remake, namely the fact that Leon has Marvin Branner's knife, as well as the flashbacks that Leon has when he returns to the RPD in Resident Evil 9 Requiem, it seems that the new canon order is Leon A and Claire B. But that's only for the remake. So for the original, Claire A, Leon B. For the remake, Leon A, Claire B. Hope that's cleared up. While I am aware of the canon order for each Resident Evil 2 version, I have played and have recorded footage of all campaigns across both the original and the remake, simply for the sake of being as thorough as possible. Now, the last thing I want to say in this section of housekeeping, I have detailed every version of the locations that we see in Resident Evil 2 across the Resident Evil series. There are depictions of these locations from outside the series. The best example I can think of would be Dead by Daylight. I have not scoured every game ever made for depictions of the locations shown in Resident Evil 2. So this is only going to cover the locations that have been recreated within Resident Evil games. There is a lot of them, believe me, I've played them all over the last few weeks. With that being said, I do believe we've finished with our housekeeping. Resident Evil 2 begins with Leon and Claire arriving in Raccoon City, only to find it abandoned and overrun with zombies. After Leon saves Claire from a zombie, the two team up, steal a cop car, and drive towards Raccoon City's police department, or RPD for short. They are separated when a zombified truck driver rams the cop car and explodes, leaving both Leon and Claire surrounded by fire and zombies. Okay, so already this first screen is fascinating to examine, because this truck crash site has been remade so many times. The first remake was on the Gamecom, since it came out in the same year. We're treated to a different camera angle, but due to the limited graphics of the Gamecom, we're lacking any animated flames as well as far less zombies. But it is unequivocally the same area. While I really dislike the Gamecom version of Resident Evil 2, even I must admit that it is impressive that this entire area is here. The next time we see this wreckage is actually only a year later in 1999 with Resident Evil 3. I bet there are lifelong Resident Evil fans that didn't know that. A few of you. The tram that Jill Valentine finds herself needing to repair during the first half of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is actually directly in front of Claire and Leon's crash site. We can see the front of the truck from this camera angle, and once Jill turns the corner, we're able to spot the RPD squad car that Claire and Leon stole in order to escape the horde outside the diner. I love this little hard to spot detail from Resident Evil 3 because it's just, it really ties the classic Resident Evil 2 and classic Resident Evil 3 together nicely. It shows how close the locations are and how interconnected they are, even if you don't really notice it. 10 years later, in 2009, the Darkside Chronicles begins its gameplay with Claire and Leon together on the same side of the truck explosion. Due to the two-player nature of the Darkside Chronicles, Leon and Claire remain together throughout the entire story. This is something that makes the story unique among every other retelling of it. Operation Raccoon City, Umbrella Corps, and Welcome to Raccoon City all move the location of the truck explosion from behind the RPD to directly in front of it. In Operation Raccoon City, we witness the truck's wreckage just a little way down the road from the RPD's main entrance. Leon escapes from the truck explosion down into an underground parking lot that may or may not be the RPD's parking lot, as opposed to the rear of the RPD as he does within the original Resident Evil 2 B scenario. While we don't see the truck crash, and we don't see the explosion that results from that crash in the Umbrella Corps, we do find the wreckage directly outside the main gate of the RPD. It's hoisted up by a crane and held there, allowing zombies and players alike to run underneath it. In Welcome to Raccoon City, we once again see the truck crash and explode, and this seems to match up with the location of the wreckage from the Umbrella Corps. And this happens directly outside the main gate of the RPD. I mean, literally, it hits the wall of the RPD. And somehow the explosion has no impact on the RPD despite its extreme proximity. But then again, it also has no impact on the plot of this film either. So, it's only really there as a callback to the Resident Evil 2 remake. That's literally it. It doesn't do anything to move the story forward. Speaking of the Resident Evil 2 remake, that game, that 2019 remake, once again moved the location of this truck crash from behind the RPD to in front of it, but this time it's a block or so down the road. During the A scenario of the remake, we have to run down the road a little bit, duck down an alleyway before we then approach the RPD from the front. This is much closer to the station than it is during the original Resident Evil 2. The truck wreckage remains in this location for Leon's revisit to Raccoon City in Resident Evil 9 Requiem. Since this is 30 years later, a lot has changed, with this wreckage being a forgotten, rusted mess by now. Honestly, it's rather haunting to revisit this classic location after so much time has passed. I really think that Resident Evil 9 did such a good job capturing this area. If we allow ourselves to travel back in time a little bit to 1998, I say a little bit, that's fucking ages, and return to the original Resident Evil 2, we can look at the other side of this truck wreckage with the B scenario. We find ourselves in this B scenario having to run down the road just a little bit before we're able to duck into the RPD's rear courtyard. It's here that we find the keys to a little shed, and we use them to make our way into the RPD more properly. After passing through this shed, we find ourselves in a courtyard that includes a metal stairway that leads onto the RPD's roof and the helipad. Something I've always wondered about the RPD from both the classic and the remake versions: where do they keep their helicopters? So they have a helipad that's big enough for one helicopter, but we know for a fact that both the Alpha and Bravo teams of the Stars had their own helicopters. But there's only space for one helicopter on the helipad, so that means that they had to keep either Alpha or Bravo's helicopter somewhere else. And that's just something that's always stood out to me. It's weird, it's not important, it's just I've always wondered where they keep the second helicopter. This area behind the RPD, not the helipad, the courtyard down the metal steps from it, is first recreated in Operation Raccoon City. Unfortunately for the purists of us, like myself, it's very different to the original Resident Evil 2 and the appearance in that game. Right away, it's obvious to see that now the roof's metal stairway, the one from the helipad, instead of leading into the rear courtyard, it now leads directly onto the Raccoon City streets. The little shed, as well as that rear parking area where there's an RPD squad car, they're gone. In their place are the RPD's dog kennels, which have for some reason been moved up from the basement of the RPD to on the street behind the RPD. This makes no sense other than allowing the dogs to escape and attack the players during Operation Raccoon City, which of course they do. The other thing missing is the crashed truck. It should be around here because Leon moves into this area, so it should be down the road. It's not here. Now that makes sense since in Operation Raccoon City it crashes in front of the RPD, but I must say it not being there feels weird. If we move back over to the A scenario of the original Resident Evil 2, after we escape from the zombies that have been attracted to the sound of the truck's explosion, we find ourselves within Kendo's gun shop. If we're playing the canon Claire A scenario in the classic Resident Evil 2, then we get what I feel like is a very uncomfortable conversation between Kendo and Claire.
Ooh, sorry about that, babe. I thought you were one of them.
What's going on in this town?
Hold on. I ain't got no clue, darling. By the time I noticed something was wrong, the entire city was infested with zombies.
I can really understand why this conversation was never recreated, because Kendo just comes across as very sleazy and creepy towards Claire. However, if we're playing the Leon A scenario, then Kendo is far less sleazy, feeling much more like a decent bloke.
Sorry about that. I thought you were one of them.
What's going on in this town?
Hold on. I don't have a clue. By the time I noticed something was wrong,
the GameCom version does have Kendo's gun shop, but it does not have Kendo. Leon comes across his store devoid of the gunsmith himself, although there is a handy dandy shotgun to be found, which is nice. In the S.D. Perry novel, City of the Dead, Leon finds Kendo's gun shop and uses it as a chance to stock up on ammo for his 50 caliber Desert Eagle. By the way, wish he had a 50 caliber Desert Eagle in the game as standard. That would be nice. Now, if you allow me to do a bit of a dramatic reading, I'm going to read you the section that pertains to Kendo's gun shop. Leon's boots scuffed shards of broken glass across the floor of the Kendo gun shop as he snapped open drawers, ash-stained sweat trickling down his face. If he couldn't find 50 calibers pretty quick, he was screwed. The few weapons still remaining in the ravaged shop were inaccessible, strung with steel cable, and the front picture window was completely smashed. It wouldn't take long for the creatures to find him. He was down to his last round, and he still had a couple of blocks to go. Oh, come on, Leon, 50 caliber Action Express. Somebody in Raccoon must have ordered them. Yes, he said out loud. Fourth drawer, under the deer rifle case, a half dozen empty clips and as many boxes of ammo. Leon grabbed a box and turned, slapping it on the counter as he glanced hurriedly at the front of the small shop. Still clear, as long as you didn't include the dead guy on the floor. He wasn't moving, but from the freshness of the wounds that oozed from his considerable gut, staining his strappy white tee, Leon wouldn't have long to linger. He didn't know how long it took for the freshly dead to stand up, and he didn't really want to find out. I've got to do it fast anyway. It's like I'm a beacon for those things, and this place is easy access. My dramatic reading. As we can see, Kendo is nowhere to be found, although I do believe he may be the fresh corpse that Leon finds within the gun shop. Now, this trend of Kendo being dead by the time that we find him continues into the Darkside Chronicles. Leon and Claire only briefly hear Kendo's last words before they burst into the gun store, only to find poor Kendo serving as the final meal for two zombies that we quickly dispatch. The Umbrella Corps features Kendo's gun shop's exterior. Only in the exterior, we do not get to enter it in the Umbrella Corps. But it's in the wrong place. It's located to the right hand side of the RPD's entrance. Just to be frank, this is a fucking stupid place for Kendo's, as it just makes no sense when you think about the journey that either Leon or Claire would have to make to get to the RPD from here. Why would they run past the entrance of the station when it's the place they're trying to get to? It's so stupid. The 2019 remake once again moves Kendo, but this time it's directly opposite the rear of the RPD. What's most interesting about this is that neither Leon nor Claire pass through Kendo's during the introduction of the game. Instead, Kendo's is moved to the midpoint of Leon's scenario. Both Leon and Ada pass through the gun store on their way out of the RPD and into the sewers. We also get a quick conversation with Kendo here, and this time he feels much more relatable. He has a young daughter who's infected, and this acts as a core piece of Leon's ongoing characterization throughout the series. This is best seen within Resident Evil 9 Requiem, when Leon has to revisit Kendo's and he remembers those he failed to save 3 decades ago.
I'm so sorry.
Meanwhile, back to the original Resident Evil 2A scenario. After we leave Kendo's, we find our way into a basketball court. Now this basketball court is found within the Gamecom, albeit in a far reduced graphical appearance. It's barely recognisable. The Darkside Chronicles features this same basketball court with extra zombies falling from the nearby rooftops, just to add to that action pacing of the light gun remake. While the basketball court is found within the 2019 remake, like most things in that remake, it's found itself moved. Instead of using it as a shortcut to the RPD's entrance, Claire instead finds herself using this basketball court as a way to make it to the Raccoon City orphanage. This means that Leon never visits the basketball court in the remake, although he does get to visit it 30 years later in Requiem. Within Requiem, it's just outside the arena where Leon has his rematch with Mr. X. Like all of Raccoon City in RE9, it's an abandoned mess, left to rot along with the zombies in the ruins of this dead city. In the original game, after we pass through the basketball court, we run down one more alleyway, up some stairs, across a thing, and then through an alleyway. And we find ourselves on the same road as the RPD itself. Although this is full of debris, forcing us to run through the remains of a broken down bus. While I can't say it's the same bus, when I was growing up watching the Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil films, I couldn't help but think that this bus at the end of the first film and the beginning of the second film was a callback to the start of Resident Evil 2. Although this bus is nowhere near the RPD, so this may have just been in my head. The first guaranteed recreation of this bus appears very briefly during the Darkside Chronicles. It's a very quick moment because Leon and Claire avoid climbing through it and are instead able to just run around it in this version. The bus appears again in the remake. This is a bit of an odd case because while it's moved in terms of its location in the original game, it is still close to another landmark that is close to in the original game. Now what I mean by this is that the bus is now behind the RPD outside the very front of Raccoon City's orphanage. If you compare it to its proximity to the basketball court, it's still pretty much where it should be. It's right next to it. Like the basketball court, Claire has to run through this bus to make it to the orphanage to save Sherry from Chief Irons. Now if you pay attention during the Mr. X boss fight during Resident Evil 9 Requiem, then you will notice that this bus acts as part of the environment that traps Leon into the boss arena. After Mr. X's death, the bus is pushed slightly to the side, making it possible to have a look round, but you can't climb through it like in the original and remake of Resident Evil 2, which personally I thought was a bit of a shame. During the original game, after we escape the bus, we run along the remains of the street and we enter the side gate of the RPD. We enter the station from the far west side of the front courtyard. Now, ever since the 2019 remake, the RPD's archway gate has become iconic to the RPD as a location. Yet, interestingly, it never appeared within the original Resident Evil 2 at all. It wasn't until Resident Evil 3 that we got to see this iconic archway gate. Now I do think that Resident Evil 3 really captures the brilliance of this archway. The design, everything is here in Resident Evil 3. Now beyond the archway we have the main entrance to the RPD building, the main doorway into the lobby. This was first seen within Resident Evil 2 and it looks amazing here. Instantly iconic. So iconic that even the Gamecom version captures this doorway rather well, which is surprising considering its lack of colour or any real graphical power. While not groundbreaking and trapped within one of the worst games I've ever played, this entranceway does look pretty good on a Gamecom. We also get to see the first live action version of the RPD entrance during Resident Evil Apocalypse, the second Paul W. Anderson film. Now it's only a blink and you miss it shot, but it is there. If we pause the film, then we can see that this version of the RPD looks absolutely nothing like any other version that we've seen either before or after Apocalypse released. And I can see why. This is just such a boring and generic look for the RPD. The PlayStation 2 multiplayer classic Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 has a scenario set within the RPD, Desperate Times, and it includes the front courtyard. Now growing up, I loved this version of the station. I used to see how long I could just survive the hordes of the infected until they managed to overwhelm me and my character would either get eaten by a horde of zombies or end up succumbing to the virus and becoming a zombie themselves. And I used to imagine that this was the fate of most of the poor souls that were trapped within the RPD before Leon or Claire arrived. This version of the RPD is identical to the original RPD courtyard in terms of its appearance and layout. It's just rendered for the first time in beautiful 3D graphics, allowing for dynamic camera movement. Now this doesn't really sound like much in 2026, but honestly, going from the static pre-rendered screens of the original Resident Evil 2 to these moving cameras in Outbreak File 2 was just amazing back then. And I have to say, I still think this area looks awesome. The orange sunrise in the background particularly just adds a whole new vibe to a classic location. The team that worked on the Outbreak games did such an incredible job bringing Raccoon City to life. You can just feel the passion for the PS1 classics in every one of the scenarios throughout these two games. The Darkside Chronicles delivers us the same location and layout, but with even prettier graphics on the Wii. Although the inability to freely explore this area does lose a lot of the charm in my opinion. Now, it wasn't until Operation Raccoon City that we got to see the RPD's entrance in HD, and I have to say, I have mixed feelings on this version. On the one hand, there is a lot of detail packed into these graphics, and it's clear that someone cared about bringing this space to life in a way that's accurate to the original Resident Evil 2. We can see this from the little details, the off-center underpass, fact that you can spot the outer stairs connecting the east wing's first and second floors on the east side of the station, even though you never go to this spot in Operation Raccoon City. But then on the other hand, you have just some of the most obvious mistakes that, at least to me, reek of crunch culture and overworked devs trying to get this area playable in a very short amount of time. Namely, we have an extra bench added to the grassy area of the west side of the front courtyard, and the fence that blocks you being able to trespass onto the east side of the station is completely missing, allowing us to simply walk around to the east side of the building and see that east side stairway in a way that is just not possible in the original Resident Evil 2. And last, and absolutely worst of all, the gate that you enter the station from in the original Resident Evil 2 on the west side of the front courtyard is not there. How do you miss this gate? Now, this gate is present within the Umbrella Corps, which is about the best thing I can say about the Umbrella Corps, because, oh, that game is bad. Once we walk through this gate and we walk down the underpass, however, we find something just as stupid. An entrance to the sewers. Needless to say, this was not in the original Resident Evil 2. It seems to lead to the T-junction that Leon gets shot in later in the game. Having an entrance to that T-junction from the RPD's entrance underpass is so stupid, and it just reminds me why I hate the Umbrella Corps. Thankfully, Capcom gave us the amazing Resident Evil 2 remake after the Umbrella Corps, and this version of the RPD is recognisable, but still very different. Firstly, we approach the RPD now from the front archway gate instead of the west side gate like in the original. Now this gives us the view of that archway that has become iconic like I mentioned earlier. I love this design. It's become so prominent for a reason. I'm always impressed with how much it just sticks to the classic version that we saw in Resident Evil 3 back in 1999, with the only real change being the lighting added to the RPD letters. But I'll be honest, this one change does a lot and I love it. It's no surprise then that this was the version of the RPD gate that was copied almost one for one in Welcome to Raccoon City's version of the station. It looks good, but it's not as good as the Remake's version. Why? Well, because now the letters themselves are the light source. They rather literally glow, and it just makes them look tacky rather than bold and strong like in both Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 2 Remake. When playing the B scenario in Resident Evil 2 Remake, you start the game entering the RPD's courtyard via the same west side gate as you did during the A scenario in the classic 1998 adventure. This is the detail I love, but another detail I love are the makeshift graves you find in this version of the courtyard. It tells us a story, because we can see how the survivors that were trapped inside the station started to bury their dead one by one in separate graves, complete with makeshift grave markers. But as time went on and more survivors died, they had to fall back onto mass graves instead. It's a small bit of environmental storytelling that really sells the desperation of the Raccoon City outbreak. I love it. Now, we are able to find a little room within the underpass during the Remake's B scenario, and if you happen to be playing as Leon for the B scenario, then he'll get changed into his RPD uniform here. Otherwise, this is where you find the key to the gate and you get into the RPD proper here on the east side. Resident Evil Requiem sees the damage that 30 long years of rot has had on this iconic location, which is now little more than ruins. The letters that I've been gushing about have been knocked down, leaving only an upright R, a wonky P, and no D. And let me tell you, it's not the first time I've lost my D. The courtyard within Requiem is blocked off on both sides, which leaves us no option but to enter the RPD proper. Which brings us to the next part of our exploration, the Raccoon City Police Department's interior. Okay, so the RPD is one hell of a big building, and just to pull back the curtain on this video just a little bit here, I did initially attempt to go through the entire RPD room by room, covering in vast detail every room, hallway and space, but I found that ended up, number one, being far too long, but number two, and more importantly, being just too unenjoyable. So ultimately, what I've decided to do is to split things up into larger chunks that we will then deal with in a little less detail than originally planned, but I do think this is best for the entertainment value of the video. We will be starting with the main lobby, and then we'll move on to the first floor, covering the east and west wing separately. Then we'll do the same for the second floor. We'll cover the third floor in its entirety, and we will end with the basement in its entirety. So, with that having been said, let's move on to the RPD's lobby by first reading an extract from S.D. Perry's novelization. There is no sign of life in the grand old lobby of the RPD building, and no sign of the disaster that had overtaken Raccoon. Leon gave up on not feeling surprised, closing the door behind him and stepping down into the sunken lobby. "Hello?" Leon kept his voice low, but it carried, echoing back to him in a whisper. Everything looked just as he remembered it. 3 floors of classically stylized architecture in oak and marble. There was a stone statue of a woman carrying a water pitcher in the lower part of the larger room, a ramp on either side leading up to the receptionist station. The RPD seal set into the floor in front of the statue gleamed softly in the diffused light from the wall lamps, as if it had been just polished. No bodies. No blood. Not even a shell casing. If there was an attack here, where the hell's the evidence? Uneasy at the profound silence of the huge chamber, Leon walked up the ramp to his left, stopping at the corner of the reception desk and leaning over it. Except for the fact that it was unmanned, nothing seemed to be out of place. The RPD's lobby area was the first real part of the station that early Resident Evil fans were really ever exposed to, and boy, oh boy, did it leave an impression on those fans, myself included. As Claire and Leon first enter the RPD, hoping desperately for a safe haven from the chaos outside, they are met by a few impressive features, and the first that catches my attention is the beautiful statue. This depicts a woman holding a water pitcher cast in white marble as part of a larger water fountain. Now, within the game, once we find the unicorn medallion and we place it within this water fountain, we're rewarded with one of the 4 station keys. If we look at the Gamecom version of this, we do find that it renders this marble water fountain really well considering its limited capabilities. But really, it's not until Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 that we get a major change in this fountain. So, throughout the Desperate Time scenario in Outbreak File 2, we're tasked with finding 5 plates. And once we do, and we place all of these plates within the water fountain, a secret entrance will reveal itself underneath the marble statue. And this is a detail I want you to keep in the back of your mind for when we look at Resident Evil 2 Remake's version of this statue, because it becomes important there. Now, within the Darkside Chronicles, we find that Marvin Branagh is dying sitting up against this water fountain. This is in stark contrast to where we find him in the original Resident Evil 2, which is the West Office. But we find him here in the Darkside Chronicles, and again, this is something that will come back within the remake. Resident Evil Uprising changes this water fountain completely, with the marble woman no longer holding the water pitcher that she was before. She now holds a set of scales and a sword, obviously meant to represent the scales of justice and the sword of justice. The next thing that catches my attention within the police station's lobby is the Raccoon police seal that's painted onto the floor. This logo is really hard to make out within the original Resident Evil 2. Even the modern PC release that you can get on Steam or GOG, which have much higher resolutions than the original game, really failed to render this badge in enough detail to properly read. It's not until the Darkside Chronicles that this badge does become readable, and it's here that we find that it says detective, which is really nonsensical when you think about it. I mean, why is the floor of the RPD considered to be a detective? I don't know, I just find this detail really funny. To each side of this fountain are two ramps that lead to the upper section of the lobby. Now, this upper section has the main reception space, complete with a typewriter to save on, a computer that unlocks the first floor doors, and a desk that reception staff can work at. If we move over to the Gamecom again, then we're able to see that this reception area has lost its desk, but the computer remains in place. The typewriter is there, but it's moved next to the computer now. Meanwhile, over in Outbreak File 2, both Officer Marvin Branagh and Rita Phillips are found within this reception area. Now, this does make sense, considering that the Desperate Times scenario that we find within Outbreak File 2 is set prior to the events of Resident Evil 2. There's also a ladder which can be lowered from the second floor in order to connect the first and second floors of the lobby together. The second floor is a lot more basic than the first floor. It simply acts as more of an open air hallway that connects the west and east wings of the second floor together. Now, Resident Evil Uprising makes the whole lobby a single level. There's no split level lobby from before, and there's also no second floor, and therefore no need for any ladder or stairs. The room is also much larger and spacious, even including several sofas. As mentioned, the fountain is here, but different. Behind the fountain we find the reception desk, which now looks very different itself. The desk is lighter, made from a white material, as opposed to the dark oak of the PS1 Classic. We also have two computers as opposed to the one from before. Now, the typewriter is gone, instead replaced with a fax machine, which does make sense considering that you can save from the menu in Resident Evil Uprising. I believe this change was made because it was a mobile phone game of the era, and not being able to save any time would be really inconvenient for a mobile phone game. While the main lobby does appear in the Umbrella Chronicles, namely during the Raccoon's Destruction campaign, it's really not worth talking about here, as it reuses assets from the Outbreak File 2 scenario Desperate Times, and therefore has nothing that we haven't seen or looked at before. The Darkside Chronicles delivers us a very faithful depiction of this classic lobby. In my opinion, this is the best version of this classic lobby that you're going to find. It's just so good. I love it. Now, Operation Raccoon City should probably hold that honour itself, considering it's in HD, and it does have an interesting depiction of the RPD's classic lobby layout. But it's only almost right. Only almost. Basically, every version of this lobby has shown that it's clean, it's devoid of the chaos that's overrun the majority of the station. Yet, in Operation Raccoon City, we find that the lobby is covered in blood and discarded papers and just other bits of debris and detritus. I don't really hate this change, but it is a change. It does make sense that the lobby would have also seen some madness, so like I say, I don't hate this change. But There's also new assets introduced, such as some vending machines with their content strewn across the floor, as well as 4 extra lights that are just not in the original or any other version of this classic lobby. They all just seem like pointless extra assets added just to fill out the space and no other reason. The reception area just has as many of these little differences as well. Instead of the 1 computer, there's now 3 desktops and 1 laptop. Operation Raccoon City just really has this annoying trend of being almost perfect to the classic layouts of these locations, but every time, without fucking fail, things are just a little wrong, and it's so frustrating. It's here that we get to the 2019 remake, and we get a massive shift in the general design and layout of the lobby, as we do for the entire RPD and Raccoon City in general during these remakes. So while the lobby here is recognisable when it's compared to the classic version, it's just obvious that a lot has changed as well. The most obvious change are the stairs that now connect the first and second floors together at the back of the room. The second floor of the lobby also now contains a statue of a lion. This is actually used within the game to find one of the 3 medallions that we need to use on the statue. The next most obvious change is just the mess and general damage within the lobby. Similar to Operation Raccoon City, I think this change makes sense, and I do like it. It makes it feel like this was an area where some survivors saw a lot of fighting, a lot of action, a desperate escape of some type took part here before we arrived, and I like that environmental storytelling. The badge painted onto the floor of the RPD now reads RPD instead of Detective, which just makes so much more sense. I love that the remake fixes these little issues. But here's where we get to the statue. The statue within the remake is very different. She's now much larger. She's also no longer part of a fountain, and her water pitcher has been switched out for a flag. Similar to Outbreak File 2, this statue also hides a secret entrance that is found when we place 3 medallions into its base. Now these were 5 plates, but they've been combined with the 1 unicorn medallion from before. So now we place 3 medallions and we get that secret entrance, and this leads down into the William Birkin fight, the first one we have with him. Similar to the Darkside Chronicles, we also meet Officer Branner within the lobby now. This is interesting, and I believe it's done for a reason that we'll get into when we talk about the west wing of the first floor. Now, while Resident Evil 3 does feature this same remake lobby, it's pretty much identical to its Resident Evil 2 depiction. I'll be honest, the same goes for its depiction in Survival Unit as well, which literally just uses images from the remake. Welcome to Raccoon City features the lobby as well, but it is very briefly, and most of it is CGI. All of it looks great. This is what I was talking about when I said the one feature that makes Welcome to Raccoon City worth watching for Resident Evil fans are the costume design and set design, and this is an example of it. The RPD's lobby, although obviously CGI, looks great here. It is great to see. It's not really until Requiem that we get any major changes to this lobby area, and the most obvious change is just the wear and tear of 30 years of abandonment being obvious, namely from the missing roof and the statue's missing head. Leon also finds a BSAA base set up within the upper section of the lobby, and the welcome banner from the West office has been moved to this lobby as a sort of ominous warning for Leon. Curiously, and this is a little thing but I want to mention it, the lion statue is present within Requiem, but it's damaged and the combination is very odd. So, follow along. Based on the fact that Leon has Marvin Branner's knife in the Resident Evil 4 remake, as well as the flashback that Leon has as he enters the RPD in Requiem, the Leon A scenario has to be canon in the remake of Resident Evil 2, as both the knife in 4 and the flashbacks in 9 align only with the Leon A scenario. Yet the lion statue combination is set as crown, torch, bird in Requiem, which is the combination for Resident Evil 2's remake's B scenario. This would imply that either Claire was the one to complete this puzzle during her B scenario, or that Leon completed it during his B scenario. Now, since we know that the Leon A scenario is canon, it must have been Claire that completed this puzzle. Yet, when we interact with the lion statue in Requiem as Leon, he thinks to himself that it was a weird puzzle, indicating that he remembers completing it. But it's the B scenario's combination, meaning that it couldn't have been him that completed it. Now, ultimately, this is a very tiny and unimportant plot hole. It doesn't matter. I really don't care about this, and I don't think that you do. But it is an interesting change that is noticed when you compare all of these versions of the lobby together. So I thought that it was definitely worth mentioning here. I still love Requiem, I still love the RE2 remake, they are so good. With that, we have finished our exploration of the RPD's lobby. Let's move from the lobby to the West Wing, starting with the waiting room, the room where we get the iconic window scare. Now, the people of Raccoon City would have reported various non-urgent crimes within this room, and I believe we can tell this from the window counter to the north end of the room. Outbreak File 2 brings us a more curved counter to this window, while the Darkside Chronicles lets us break the glass of the windows, which in turn lets us see into the West Office. Now, opposite the counter, we have a rather uncomfortable looking sofa, which I like to imagine people taking a seat there while they were waiting for the person ahead of them to finish with the officer the other side of the window. Outbreak has redesigned this sofa so that it's a little more comfortable, now made from a rather fancy looking leather as opposed to the old fabric from the original game. If we move a little deeper into the room, then we can find some angled desks that are available for the public to use, complete with what looks like various forms that were to be filled out in order to report a crime. Within Outbreak, these desks have been updated with a now flat surface and loads of little drawers, each presumably containing one of the forms. We can even see some of these forms that have been left abandoned on the desk space itself. As we move around the desks and the room dividers that they rest up against, then we can see a staff-only door placed by a window. Rather famously, as we near this door, a licker crawls across the outside of the window, spooking any observant players. Now, during Outbreak, we are unable to open this door, but we do get a recreation of that licker scare. This version is, sadly, worse than it is in Resident Evil 2 Classic, with the licker now slowly crawling from the bottom to the top of the window instead of the quick left to right darting movement that it made in the classic Resident Evil 2. But for everything that Outbreak File 2 gets wrong, the Darkside Chronicles gets right, because the licker within that game feels quick, snappy and well timed. The last important detail to mention within this room is that in the original Resident Evil 2, it features a universal item chest. This is absent from every other version of the room. This room it's a room I love, and it's because it very easily creates a rather engaging mental image of just a little bit of everyday life for the citizens and officers within Raccoon City before Umbrella's Outbreak destroyed it. If we move over to the Gamecom, then we have a real shift in the general vibe that this room gives off, with it no longer feeling like a waiting area for the general public. Instead, it feels more like a really bare bones armory. And this is because the window counter is gone, replaced with just an ugly brick wall and a set of low shelves. The comfortable sofa is also now an ugly and even more uncomfortable looking bench. The public use desks are now just another bench and a set of 4 lockers. The door on the far wall has been moved away from the window, meaning that we don't get to witness that iconic licker scare. I hate this version of the room. It's awful, it's ugly, and it just makes no sense. This is a major L for the Gamecom. Although the Gamecom gave us arguably the worst version of this room, the 2019 remake gives us what I think is the best. The window counter is back, with a nice little information sign above it. The clutter within the room makes it feel real and alive, with the blood along the floor hinting at some awful fate of some poor soul trapped within the RPD before either Leon or Claire arrived. The sofa has kept that comfortable leather design from Outbreak, but it's also now gained 3 other sofas, which makes it feel much more of a waiting area where more people would be able to wait. Meanwhile, the public use desks are now a combination of their classic design from the original Resident Evil 2 with that sloped surface, but they also take on some of Outbreak's design with the drawers. The liquor scare is also here, but you may not have noticed that straight away because it's been moved away from the A scenario and instead into the B scenario. And I've got to say, once you do get to it, it's perfect. It's quick, punchy, and just a lovely callback. Now, Resident Evil 3 Remake keeps this room identical, with the only real change being a locked container on one of the sofas. The 2025 mobile game Resident Evil Survival Unit does feature this remake version of the waiting room, and it's identical in design, but the soulless lighting, lazy camera angle, and just ugly unbroken colours along the walls and floor just make it feel bland and awful. Requiem shows us this same room 30 years later, and it is a mess in complete ruins. A massive hole in the southern wall, while everything else, including those nice comfy sofas, are covered in debris. The window counters have been boarded up with wood, presumably by the BSAA, and it's also probably them that installed this fancy new ladder that connects this waiting area to the second floor's balcony. For now, I think it would be best to jump to the other side of this reception window into the West Wing's office space. This is the area where we first meet Officer Branner in the original Resident Evil 2, with him bleeding out against the lockers. He's only feet from the reception window, meaning that after we unlock the doors with the keycard that he gives us and we were to walk into the West Wing's waiting room, we should have been able to see him through the glass. Now, this isn't possible in the original game, just due to those pre-rendered backgrounds, but I do think it's why he was moved in newer games, such as the Dark Side Chronicles and the Resident Evil 2 Remake, because moving him simply avoids an awkward moment where we see him just laying there after our dramatic goodbye. The layout of the room is pretty typical for what I would expect of an office working space in, a police station like this. Several desks have been put together within the centre of the room, with shelves containing what I believe are various case files around the edge of the room. Now, there are some lockers that are next to the door that leads into the main lobby. The reception window is located next to these lockers, although it's missing in the GameCom version of the room. The most interesting detail are the party supplies that are stacked up on what would have been Leon's desk. These were obviously intended to celebrate the rookie's first day with the department. The little blue sign on the right hand side of Leon's desk reads Welcome Leon, with welcome spelt with 2 L's instead of 1. Now, there's a side office contained within this room, and there's another desk in there. We end up finding Marvin Branner here when we return to this room later in the game, although sadly by this point he has turned into a zombie and we're forced to put him down. This room shows up again in Resident Evil 3, and it's pretty much identical to its classic Resident Evil 2 appearance. The only real difference is Marvin, who we find dead in his side office. You can tell just how good the original design of this office is, as the 2019 remake barely changes a thing. There are some extra lockers included at the other end of the room. One of these new lockers reads Jojo and hides a secret in Resident Evil 9 Requiem. And the party supplies have been changed up. They now include a banner that hangs from the ceiling that reads Welcome Leon. And a little detail I love is that there is a small gap between the L and the C in welcome. And if we pay attention, we can find an extra L that has been removed on the desk below the banner. This is just a cute little callback to the original misspelling of the word. During the Resident Evil 3 remake, Carlos is able to explore this room, and he'll even comment on the banner if you aim the camera at it.
Yeah. Welcome, Leon. Bet you had a guy's first day.
This room is an abandoned mess in Requiem, as is the rest of the station. The 30 long years are measured out in dust and debris. The biggest changes are the missing banner, which has been moved from this office into the main lobby, as mentioned during the lobby section earlier. There's also a new Easter egg hidden within the Johto locker. If you complete a treasure hunt left behind by Barry Burton, then you're able to find a couple of tickets to the Raccoon City Zoo, which is a nice little nod to Outbreak File 2, and a Sega Saturn complete with a few games, which include the first Resident Evil game. This Easter egg has to be seen as non-canon for a few reasons. Firstly, it would be odd for the first game to both be canon and exist as a video game at the same time. Secondly, this locker is unlocked and empty within the Resident Evil 2 remake, so unless Barry popped back after the city was destroyed to set this treasure hunt up, it's just a plot hole. But I'll be honest, like the lion statue in the lobby, I don't really care if it's a plot hole, it's fun, and I really did enjoy this little treasure hunt during my first playthrough of Requiem. Whenever I replay the game, I found that this is still a highlight for me. As we move to the westmost hallway, we get to see what are the first real signs of chaos and debris within the original Resident Evil 2. Right away, we're able to tell that some sort of fight has occurred here. This becomes even more obvious as we round the corner at the end of the hallway to find a headless corpse within a puddle of blood. The nearby broken window gives us a telltale clue of what to expect. As we walk down the hallway a little further, we find another puddle of blood, this time with more blood dripping from the ceiling, and it's here that we're introduced to the iconic licker creature as it drops from the ceiling, ambushing us. This is a great moment, unless you played it on the Gamecom, in which case you just get a awful recreation of one of Resident Evil's best moments. The Dark Side Chronicles, however, makes up for the Gamecom's lacking performance and delivers us everything that the Gamecom couldn't. We first enter the room to the crunch of broken glass as Leon and Claire first enter the hallway, which is now covered in the still wet, slick blood of the licker's victim that leaves a nightmarish trail for Leon and Claire to follow around the corner where they're ambushed by the monster. I do not think you could have done a better recreation of this moment in light gun form. For an on-rails shooter, this is peak. This is perfect. The Resident Evil 2 remake takes a lot of inspiration from the Dark Side Chronicles, with the hallway now much darker than it was in the original game. There's also now a new corner here, although in the remake this corner is blocked by random junk that has been piled up in the middle of the hallway. As we move further down the hallway towards the turning point at the windows, we find a dead officer with his face ripped open, his jaw barely clinging to what remains of his face. Now, we get to witness this attack in the Resident Evil 3 remake, which is a really nice detail that just ties these two remakes together in terms of continuity. Around the corner is another dead officer, this time hanging impaled on a broken pipe from the ceiling. While the licker that did this is missing from the A scenario of Resident Evil 2 remake, we can find it if we play through the B scenario within this hallway, and we do get to recreate the iconic moment from the original game. Survival Unit provides a pitiful attempt at this hallway, which is just as bland as the rest of that awful game. The only thing notable is a random ass zombie that falls from heaven to say hello to us. It's Requiem that does something new and interesting with this hallway, and it's simply clearing away that random junk from that first new corner, which allows us to move from the waiting room to the rest of the West Wing far more effectively. Next, we get to the briefing room, a space where officers and detectives within the RPD would gather in order to learn about the local ongoings within Raccoon City and the various cases active at the moment. The original Resident Evil 2 has this room feeling a lot like an old school classroom, complete with these little chair desk combo units, a chalkboard, a whiteboard and a ceiling mounted TV. The biggest difference between the briefing room and what I would expect from an old school classroom are the coffee facilities. While I've never been to the United States, here in the UK, we typically don't allow children to drink coffee. They have to drink energy drinks instead. The back of the room features a fireplace that is kind of odd because it feels like it belongs more in a British mansion than it does a United States police station. And this room shows up again in Resident Evil 3, but the only difference is that there is a STARS card found on the desk by the chalkboard and podium. The briefing room begins to feel far more realistic as we get into the Resident Evil 2 remake, with a few desks and plenty of foldable chairs scattered about. These foldable chairs feel like they're designed far more for the adult police officers as opposed to the rather childish desk chair combo things from the original. The whiteboard is missing from the main briefing area, the ceiling mounted TV is still here, and that will become important during Requiem. The back of the room, which is now chained shut initially, begins to feel even more realistic as there's no fireplace at all. Instead it kind of acts as a storage area for the briefing room, which is why we find the missing whiteboard and case files here. All things which would be expected during a briefing. And this briefing room shows up in Resident Evil 3 Remake, it's only lacking the chain that separates the two halves of the room in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now the briefing room does show up again in Survival Unit, but like everything in that piece of shit game, it's dull and lifeless, acting as nothing more but a soulless recreation of the remake's RPD. Requiem meanwhile shows us this room in ruins. Multiple walls are destroyed, allowing us to see the Raccoon City streets from this briefing room. Very little is left to explore, with only really the chalkboard that contains a document Leon can read. If you have been following Barry's treasure hunt, the JoJo locker key is hidden on the ceiling mounted TV. The West Wing also contains the evidence lockers, the storage room and the photo darkroom, but I believe the most interesting change between all the versions is the addition of a hallway that connects them, which was introduced in the remake. The hallway where we find the first liquor, the westmost hallway, now has an extra right turn, and this leads to the storage room and the west office, connecting with the West Wing stairwell hallway. This allows for much easier and logical movement around the entire West Wing. Although, as I mentioned when talking about this hallway before, it's blocked by piled up junk in the remake, only accessible in Requiem. Still, I think this addition makes so much sense since it connects the station together in a very logical way, while the blockage forces us, as players in a video game, to navigate it in a way that was designed by the devs. Really clever design. With that, we can move on to the first floor East Wing. So the East Wing mirrors the West Wing in some ways. We enter into a hallway complete with phones, benches for people to wait on, a window counter into the East office that curves around the corner, and a couple of vending machines. The phones and utilitarian design of these benches, complete with as what might possibly be handcuffs or spaces for handcuffs to be attached to, makes me think that this is a processing area for people that have been arrested by the RPD officers. This means that those officers working within the East office would be responsible for filling out the paperwork pertaining to those arrested. Now the Gamecom struggles to bring this space to life, with the entire hallway feeling basically unrecognisable on the little handheld that couldn't. Outbreak File 2 meanwhile rather changes these uncomfortable looking benches into slightly more comfortable looking level ones. Besides that one change, this hallway is almost identical in Outbreak, and it's really impressive how well the Outbreak team have brought this area to life. It's one of the things I really just love about the Outbreak games. And this is one of the few areas that appears in both the Umbrella Chronicles and the Darkside Chronicles. those two light gun shooters for Nintendo's Wii. This is one area where I feel like the Darkside Chronicles misses the mark on redesigning a classic area. The bright walls and floor colours, it removes that sort of weird grimy aesthetic that it had. Meanwhile, the Umbrella Chronicles lazily reuses assets and environments from Outbreak File 2, but in doing so, it happens to create a more interesting version of this hallway, at least in my opinion. Resident Evil 2's Remake absolutely nails this area, having it coated in darkness as well as fresh, wet crimson blood that pulls around the shutter that you have to crawl under to first reach this area during the A scenario. There is also a new closet area added near the vending machines. It's not much, but it does make sense. As you turn the corner, the messy debris continues to tell the story of recent combat and death. We also find a new door that leads into the press room. As we continue past this new door, we find another turn-in that leads to a toilet. And this is where I need to mention the mildly interesting fact that the original RPD from the original Resident Evil 2 doesn't include any toilets. There's not a single toilet in the entire station. It's a strange oversight in itself, but one that is made rather comical when you notice that there are two manholes that lead directly into the sewers. What were the officers that worked within the RPD supposed to do? Open one of these two manholes and just aim directly into the sewers? It's quite funny when you think about it. At least I think it is. This corridor ends in 3 more doors, along with various windows along the easternmost wall. One door leads back into the east office again, providing entrance into this office from both sides of the hallway. One leads outside to the metal staircase that connects the first and second floors of the east wing together, while the last door leads into a small office space that connects 2 separate corridors together. I think this little office may be one of the strangest spaces when you think about how the remake's RPD would have worked before the outbreak. Why have this office space between 2 hallways? When you think about it, it doesn't really serve a logical purpose. The original Resident Evil 2 game has so many of these little oddities that they really kind of go unnoticed after a while, but the remake fixes most of them, which means that this one stands out all the more because of it. The god-awful survival unit does its thing and it removes all character and atmosphere away from this hallway, brightening the whole area up, removing most of the blood and boarding up the toilets, all to strip away any charm from the remake's amazing design. Requiem limits how much we're able to really explore this area, as most of our time is spent fleeing from a rampaging tyrant, but that doesn't mean what we can see isn't great, because I think it is. The blood has long since dried up and flaked away, leaving only dull red stains in its place. The dust and debris found all over the station covers this hallway, but we're also able to see the equipment the BSAA have brought in scattered all around the place. The East Office is very similar to the West Office, just slightly larger. I only really bring it up because it's an example of one of those strange little spaces within the original Resident Evil 2. So we have to pass through this office to reach the break room, basement access, and the outside metal stairs that lead to the second floor. Why would you have to pass through an entire office to reach these very prominent places? Like, imagine you're working in the West Office and you finish your shift and you want to go get your car and drive home. You have to leave the West Wing, walk across the lobby, into the East Wing, past anyone who's being processed, through the East Office, and then through a door, down another hallway, down some stairs, down another hallway to get to the parking lot. It feels a bit odd. This has been fixed with the remake's redesign of the East Wing, with the East Office now having 2 doors to enter it, one from either side. But my biggest problem with the remake's layout is that the interrogation room is no longer accessible from the first floor. Within the new layout, officers would now have to take suspects upstairs, either through the central lobby or the exterior metal steps, past the chief's personal office and down the new stairs, down one more hallway before they finally got to the interrogation room. Meanwhile, if you look at the original layout, it was a simple march through one door and down one hallway, which makes so much more sense when you think about it. The original Resident Evil 2's press room, while a bit of a nightmare to get to, is home to one of the strangest puzzles, with either Leon or Claire needing to light 3 torches in the right order to release a cog from a painting on the other side of the room. Still, when we do this, we get one of my favourite jump scares in the series, with Mr. X bursting through the goddamn wall like he's the Kool-Aid jug man. Kool-Aid jug man. The layout of this room, besides the odd puzzle, is pretty much what you'd expect, with a desk at the front of the room complete with microphones, plenty of foldable chairs for the press to sit on, cameras to film any press conferences, and even a whiteboard to present any evidence that the public would need to be made aware of, or the press. The only thing that stands out are the 3 torches for the puzzle. Not many police stations have gas torches anymore, not even here in England. This classic press room is only seen in one other game, and that's the Gamecom version of Resident Evil 2. I mean, it technically is in the Gamecom version, don't get me wrong, but it's lacking so much detail that it doesn't even look like a press room anymore. The desks with the microphones are gone, most of the chairs are gone, and only the 3 torches remain, which means only the strangest part of this room is left, making its purpose within the Gamecom's RPD a bit of a mystery. Hey, that rhymed. The Remake press room is just a more modern version of what you would expect a press room to look like. No more of those gas-fueled torches, that's for sure. In their place are 2 flags, a United States flag, and a flag with the Raccoon City police seal on it. The whole room has also been rotated 180 degrees, and this is because the door to enter the room has been relocated from opposite the interrogation room into the east hallway. If we move over to survival unit, which let's face it, no one wants to do, then we find that the press room has been reduced to the usual soulless crap that we've come to expect from that game. It does feature a new puzzle, one where we have to find a 3-letter code to a lock, with the final letter being projected onto the rear wall of the press room. Once we complete it, we get the bolt cutters which allow us into the east office. We rather literally get punched into the press room by Mr. X during Requiem, having to very quickly turn tail and fucking leg it. This means that we don't get to see much of the room, but what we do get to see, mostly in photo mode if you're inclined, is also what you'd expect from Requiem, a room that is in ruins with debris everywhere. Now, I'm pretty sure that everyone that's played the original Resident Evil 2 will remember the licker that jumps through the interrogation room's window. I know for sure I remember that shit, because when I was a kid playing this game around my uncle's house, this scare made me scream so loud, drop the controller, which sent my dad and my uncle running up the stairs to make sure I was okay. That is a fucking core memory, man. Yeah, I played this game at a far younger age than I should have. Yeah, sure, I was a bit young for this game, but it fostered a love for the series that has yet to wane. That flame still burns bright, baby. This jump scare is recreated wonderfully in the remake, with the newer graphics and physics allowing the licker to not just break through the mirrored window, but to also destroy the table in the middle of the room. While the Resident Evil 2 remake isn't perfect, it's the little moments like this that just make me love it so much. Although, now that I'm a lot older, I can say that it didn't cause me to scream and drop my controller. I managed to get over that jump scare. I think the last thing I want to look at on the entire first floor is the night duty room. This room is located next to the stairs that lead down to the station's basement. Officers that were on call for the night would use this room to rest between calls and various emergencies. To this effect, we have 2 sets of bunk beds, a small sink for washing up, and a set of lockers separating the 2 sides of the room. On the other side of the room, the side by the door that we enter into, we have a table with plenty of snacks on it in the original. This night duty room is recreated in Outbreak File 2, and its appearance in Outbreak File 2 is where I have the most experience with this room. I don't know why, but when I was role-playing as a survivor trapped within the RPD, I always used to slink off to this room to eventually succumb to the T-virus. The biggest change to the original is just the extra clutter around the room. The table is now also covered with books and bits of paperwork as opposed to the snacks from before. The remake's recreation of this room is very faithful to the original, lovingly so. Everything from the classic is here, the bunk beds, the sink, the lockers and the table. It's beautiful and it shows how much love the development team of the remake really had. And with that, we're finished with the RPD's first floor. So, let's make our way upstairs. When looking at the West Wing's second floor, we have two rooms that are of interest, the STARS office and the library. Let's start by looking at the STARS office. Let's start by looking at the radio system. This massive piece of equipment is never really used within Resident Evil 2, but Jill Valentine uses it to intercept a transmission from the UBCS during Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. While this radio is present within the remake's version of the STARS office, it's not used by anyone anymore. Now Carlos is the one who visits the RPD during RE3's remake, and while he does contact Jill on a radio, he uses his portable radio and not the massive STARS one. Next to this radio, we have a gun cabinet that contains one of a few weapons depending on which character and scenario you're playing. Claire A will find a grenade launcher, Leon B will find a magnum, Claire B will find the revolver, and lastly Leon A will find a shotgun. If we move over to Resident Evil 3, then Jill will be able to find a revolver. It doesn't really make any sense how Leon, Jill and Claire were all able to find weapons in this cabinet. And then again, that is just video game logic, I guess. You know, one of the weird oddities of life. During the remake, this gun cabinet is now locked away behind a door that's controlled by a nearby computer. You can only access this with the STARS USB drive. An interesting fact about that, while you use a USB-A drive to unlock this computer, this would have been very unlikely since that type of USB only entered commercial use during 1998, the same year that this game is set. What this means is that the STARS having access to that drive before the mansion incident would have been basically impossible, and they wouldn't have got it after the mansion incident because of the cover-up that smeared their names. So why would their unit get any funding? That doesn't make any sense. So it makes no sense why they would have access to this, at the time, advanced drive. But like the gun cabinet, it really is just best not to think too hard about this and just enjoy the game. Honestly, I have autism and ADHD, and Resident Evil is one of my special interests, one of my hyper obsessions. I have thought about everything so much, and you just get in your own head about this shit. It's best to just enjoy the game. It doesn't ruin the story or the themes or anything, so don't worry about it. Now, the desks within the STARS office are also something I found myself confused over. I've told you, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Resident Evil. And this is primarily because there are 12 members of STARS, yet within the original game, only 6 desks. The desk at the north end of the office belongs to Albert Wesker. Then, moving down from north to south, the other desks belong to Barry Burton, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, and lastly, Rebecca Chambers. The last desk is a little thing by the door with a phone and fax machine next to it. This leaves 8 members of STARS that have nowhere to work on a day-to-day basis. If you say that maybe 2, one from each team, works on the radio, then that leaves 6 team members with nowhere to work on a day-to-day basis. It's extra odd that most of the desks belong to the Alpha team members, which has a little bit of sense in its consistency, but then we have a desk dedicated to Rebecca from the Bravo team. Why does a single member of the Bravo team have a desk? And why is that member not Enrico, who is the captain of the Bravo team? Why does Rebecca, the rookie newbie, have a whole desk to herself when not even Enrico does? I swear, the more you think about this office, the less it makes sense. it makes even less sense when we look at the GameCom version of the office. The radio is gone, while the gun cabinet and a single desk remains. But there are plenty of shelves. One even has a chair pushed up to it like it is a desk. Speaking of chairs, there are a few random-ass chairs scattered about the room. If it wasn't for a rather sad-looking Stars logo on the wall, I don't think I'd be able to guess that this was even the Stars office. Now, if we move over to the remake, as the remake tends to do, this office has been fixed. There are now 12 desks. We have 8 in the main room, 2 side by side to each other. So you'd have people working on one desk each, and there is 8 desks in the middle of the room. There's 2 pushed up against the wall where Rebecca's bag hangs on a little hook, and next to the radio, between Rebecca's bag and the radio. There's 2 more desks there. Then we have Wesker's desk that is in a little side office now, just to make sure that he feels like a little sparkly princess on his own little space. Meanwhile, we have one more desk that is operating the computer that opens up the armory door. That means that everyone has a place to work, and nobody has to permanently work on the radio, which kind of doesn't really make sense. But we can assume that the 2 desks pushed against the wall next to the radio would operate the radio during any times that this was needed. The office feels so much more thought out and logical now. The remake does such a good job with that. It makes the RPD feel like so much more of a believable, real place. And I really just love how you can see and imagine how this police station would have worked on a day-to-day basis before the events of the games that we play. If we move over to the library, then we get to see a room that has changed a lot between the original Resident Evil 2 and the Resident Evil 2 remake. The library that we find in 1998's Resident Evil 2 is a place of quiet and calm. A room where there are no threats, allowing us to focus on the puzzle within the room. As we enter this room, we're met with 4 movable bookshelves with a massive mural above them that depicts a warrior woman holding a severed head aloft in victory. If we move to the other side of the room, then we can find some more bookshelves, but these ones aren't movable. The double doors by the bookshelves lead on to the 2nd floor of the main lobby area. If we climb up the stairs that are in the library, then we get to the 3rd floor, finding more bookshelves and a door that leads to the main lobby's 3rd floor. If we turn the corner while on the library balcony, walk into the end of this balcony, then we'll find a floor that gives way below us, dropping us into an area that was inaccessible from below. This allows us to move the 4th movable bookshelf. Now, once all 4 of these bookshelves are in the proper place, we will be able to access a key item that was locked away. Meanwhile, if we move over to Resident Evil 2 remake version of this library, we can instantly tell how different this library is. First of all, we entered the room from a 3rd floor attic area that was simply not in the original game at all, expanding the RPD a little bit. And this brings us into the library's balcony area. The balcony itself has been expanded, with access to a door on the east end of the room, and this door leads to the 3rd floor lobby, which is similar to the original layout. While you'd normally be able to walk across a walkway over the movable bookshelves, this has broken by the time that Leon and Claire arrive. We are able to try and access this door from the other side, but if we do, we'll find that the walkway gives way, dropping us to the lower floor. This is a simple reference to the original game, but it has very little practical use outside of making a quick escape from Mr. X if he happens to be pursuing you in this area. I personally love trolling him here, letting him get really close to me and then just drop him through the floor so he can't get me. The balcony leads to a set of rather pretty and grand looking stairs that leads us to the main level of the library. And the 2nd floor of the library has a bunch of bookshelves. These separate the rooms into 2 halves. The side that the stairs exit onto has a bunch of desks that people can work or study at. The other side of the room simply has a ladder that leads up to the balcony. We do have 2 doors. The door on the east wall leads into the 2nd floor of the main lobby, while the door on the south wall leads to a little balcony area above the west wing's waiting room. This is the area that we found a ladder connecting to in Resident Evil Requiem. Here, however, there is no ladder. That was added presumably by the BSAA, as I said during that section. The main floor of the library is host to a more diegetic version of the puzzle in the original game. We no longer have to press buttons to move these bookshelves. We have to use a jack to lower one of the bookshelves onto rails and then move them into place so that we can run across the top of them to access the door on the other side of the balcony. This lets us get onto the 3rd floor of the lobby area and in turn access the clock tower. I love this change. It's essentially the same puzzle having to move the bookcases, but now it just makes more sense, feeling just more practical, logical and realistic. If we return to this library in Requiem, then we're able to find a picture of Rebecca Chambers in a book on the 3rd floor balcony area. Now, this picture is a reference to an Easter egg within Resident Evil 2. If we click on Wesker's desk 50 times in the original game, we will find a roll of film. If we develop this film, then we can find this same picture of Rebecca Chambers. Now, we can also find this within the Resident Evil 2 remake as well. So this picture is just a fun little nod back to the Easter egg in both the original Resident Evil 2 and the Resident Evil 2 remake. There is very little to find in this library during Requiem besides this Easter egg, but it will give us the combination to a lock in the STARS office, so it is worth visiting the library on at least the first playthrough. Although for nostalgia's sake, I always find myself visiting every part of the RPD whenever I replay Requiem. Okay, so I just need to pause and make a note while editing here. I made a slight mistake here, and I'd like to address it. So, when I said there's nothing else to find within the library in Requiem, what I meant is there are no other Easter eggs to find. But you do find the jack that you used in Resident Evil 2, and that is found within the library, so it is worth exploring the library. So I wanted just to pause the video here and make this editorial note. Thank you. Now let us move across from the West Wing to the East Wing. When it comes to the East Wing's 2nd floor, we've already looked at the helipad, covering the original game, the remake, as well as Operation Raccoon City, but we did miss its appearance within Outbreak File 2. Now this version of the roof/helipad looks like complete hell, with the flames cutting off any chance of a retreat via the station's rear exit. While it really makes no sense whatsoever that there is absolutely no evidence left over of this raging inferno when Leon and Claire arrive at the RPD, I have to admit I still love the visuals of this inferno, this blaze. It just looks so striking, so good. It really just looks good. There's no other way to really say that. Now, fans of both the original and the remake will know that this helipad's doorway leads into the East Wing hallway, the same one that leads to the metal stairs connecting the 1st and 2nd floors together. This can be seen in the original game, Outbreak File 2, The Umbrella Chronicles, and the Resident Evil 2 remake. This layout is so well known by fans, yet somehow Operation Raccoon City gets this area completely wrong. The rooftop now leads to the giant tiger hallway connecting Chief Iron's personal office to his trophy/storage room. To make things worse, this hallway now has an extra corridor that exits onto the main lobby's 2nd floor. This is just all sorts of wrong. How could the Operation Raccoon City team get the iconic RPD's layout so wrong? If we return to the hallway that should connect the RPD's roof and helipad to the metal steps, then we get to talk about Mr. X's 2 amazing introductions. Now, the original game will introduce players to Mr. X during the B scenario, while the remake changes things up, instead moving Mr. X's introduction to the A scenario instead. When comparing these two introductions, I really do find it hard to decide which is better. The original game gives us more detail on how Umbrella deploys these BOWs, with us witnessing a helicopter dropping a pod which then opens mid-air to release the Tyrant that then smashes through the roof of the RPD. I love this visual of Mr. X dropped into the station like a sentient killer torpedo. I really do wish we got to see it during the remake, because seeing that in the modern 2019 graphics would have been amazing. However, that's not to say that what the remake does give us isn't also great, because it is. Its one biggest advantage is that it's entirely gameplay. There is no stopping the action now to watch a cutscene. That mean that both the replay value and the immersion of the moment really do benefit from there being no cutscene, no stopping to the gameplay. It's also just daunting the first time you see Mr. X lift this whole ass helicopter out of the way with a single arm like it's nothing. I think by now we've all beaten the remake like 20 plus times, and we've all made Mr. X our bitch. And it is easy to forget how scary and intimidating he was during that first playthrough, when you didn't fully understand how he worked and you were still learning the mechanics. And a lot of that intimidation was thanks to this introduction. It's not just Mr. X that likes to drop in on us in this area, because if we look at the art room, then we get another licker jump scare. These bastards just love jumping out of nowhere. After we've picked up the cards, a licker will break through the skylight above us and land directly in front of us. This is another moment that really scared the crap out of me as a kid. As an adult, I'm ready for this motherfucker, and I enter this room with locked and loaded. But boy, did it get child me back in the day. I think that the remake actually improves on this moment by simply removing the small cutscene that plays, allowing the licker to simply break through the skylight and actually get us by surprise. It gives us more control, more agency, and it allows us to get spooked more organically. Then we get to Chief Iron's office, which is very similar in all of its appearances. This is a room that it seems even Operation Raccoon City gets mostly right. It does reduce the amount of taxidermied animals within the room drastically, but besides that, it's recognizable as the Chief's room. The room itself has a desk opposite the main entrance on the eastern wall, with a second door that leads to the Stuffed Tiger hallway along the southern wall. There are plenty of taxidermied animals decorating this room, hung from the walls, placed on nearly every surface. It's pretty obvious that Chief Irons has a hobby. His introduction, however, I feel is just so much better within the original Resident Evil 2. I mean, that is just my opinion, but hear me out. The scene with him sitting at his desk with the dead body of the mayor's daughter just laid out like a prize hunt in front of him does so much to instantly sell him as a threat. While we do get to see Catherine's body within the remake, that's the name of the mayor's daughter by the way, she's kept within the orphanage and not the RPD. And even then, she's little more than clutter for the room. No emphasis is placed on her at all. It feels like she's just more of a callback to the original game than actually anything drastic to do in this game. No, instead we're introduced to Irons within the parking lot of the RPD in the remake, and while we learn that he's a dickhead, the introduction really does fall short to the original introduction that he got. The secret exit within Irons' office is also different within the remake. During the original, it leads us to a hidden dungeon where he hides the bodies of his victims, disposes of them, and practices his taxidermy. In the remake, there's no dungeon. Instead, it leads to a lift that provides him with direct access to the parking lot. I suppose this makes more logical sense, and it goes towards the remake's effort of making the RPD feel like more of a real place. But it removes that dark, sinister vibe that Irons had within the original classic game. He, and by association his office, feels so much less threatening during the remake. During the Claire A scenario in the original game, we fight the G adult that tears itself from Irons' body within his twisted dungeon, and we get no such fight within the remake. Instead, he just dies, and the G infant fucks off to God knows where. The Dark Side Chronicles, I feel, does him much better. We find Irons within his dungeon, preparing Catherine's body, which we interrupt. As he prepares to fight both Leon and Claire, he's planted with a G embryo. This grows to an adult almost instantly and rips Irons in half as it emerges from his body. Very similar to the chestburster from Alien, but somehow more graphic and more gory. We then have to fight the Chief's mutant child in a pretty fun boss fight for a light gun shooter. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect because, quite frankly, it's not. The dialogue is a little too on the nose. The gestation of the G embryo makes no sense as to what we know in the lore, and Irons' role within this retelling of Resident Evil 2 is far too short, with this moment being both our introduction and send-off to him. But when I compare it to his very lackluster role in the remake, this does feel marginally better. But let's not dwell on the negative, let's move forward and move upwards to the RPD's third and final floor above ground. We've already covered the library's third floor balcony, so instead, let's just focus this section on looking at the bell tower. It's a very small space within the original game, and this has carried over to all three of its other appearances. It's one floor in which we need to use a crank in order to lower a set of stairs to get to the upper floor. Now this is recreated within the Resident Evil Uprising Java game, with us also having to use a crank to lower the stairs. The remake breaks this trend with us having to use a cog to lower the stairs instead. However we do it, once we get upstairs, in the original game we have to use a cog to complete the mechanism of the tower, which then opens up a not so hidden doorway containing a key item. Now we can then choose to slide down this duct in order to get to the basement quicker. During Uprising we have to use the cog, which then lets us set the time to 3 o'clock, giving us a chest plug, but not opening up any shortcut to the basement. The remake is the most unique, with us having to activate the bell using 2 cogs, which knocks down an electronic part needed to either open the locked door to Iron's storage room or to open the doors in the jail cells. Either way, the bell is destroyed in the process. We get to see an example of how much the remake really changes from the original here. Even the Java 2009 mobile demake manages to keep this puzzle mostly the same, but the remake changes it drastically. I'm not saying this is bad, I'm not even saying it's good, it is just a thing that's worth noting. Similar to Leon, let's take that shortcut down to the basement, shall we? The RPD's basement is massive. So, let's look at each room from left to right on the map, which means that we start with the jail cells. This is of course where we meet Ben Bertolucci, the intrepid importer hoping to blow the Umbrella story wide open. He's held in one of only 2 cells within the RPD. This always felt like a very small number for a police station this size to me. It raises the question of where all those being held for questioning would go. Outbreak File 2 does a little bit to answer this question, as during the Desperate Times scenario, we're able to find 2 men being held within the same cell. These 2 men are gone by the time that Leon and Claire arrive at the station, with only Ben remaining. This does tell us that prisoners would be expected to share cells within the RPD. But speaking of Ben and Outbreak, our survivors are the ones that give him the file he has on Umbrella in exchange for one of the plates to open up that secret entrance on the fountain. Now this is the same file that he would go on to give Leon. I just think this is a nifty little connection between Outbreak File 2 and Resident Evil 2. These cells are seen again in Resident Evil Uprising, although there are now more of them. I honestly love this little Java game. It's so much fun to play if you can just figure out the emulator. Its gameplay reminds me a lot of Resident Evil Gaiden for the GBA if you've ever played that game. This basement area in Uprising includes a door to the sewers as well as the cells. Besides that, it's just one big room. No sign of the parking lot, kennels, autopsy room and so on from the original Resident Evil 2 or its remake. The Resident Evil 2 remake massively increases the number of cells, as well as changing the reason that Ben is locked in his cell. You see, in the original he's locked himself in the cell so that the zombies, Cerberuses and other Umbrella nasties can't get to him. In the remake, Irons has found out about the dirt that Ben has on him and Umbrella, and has therefore framed him and locked him away. Now he ends up getting killed by Mr. X in the remake, whereas in the original it's William Birkin that gets him. Welcome to Raccoon City includes the only version of the RPD with less cells than the original, halving its number to only 1. Ben is locked up here, but I'm not sure we ever get a reason why. He's also less of a reporter in this film and more of just a crackpot conspiracy guy. Since the budget didn't stretch to afford Mr. X and Birkin hasn't yet mutated within the film, it's just a random ass zombie that gets poor old Ben here. The kennels are just down the hallway from the cells, unless of course you're playing Operation Raccoon City, because as we saw earlier, they're now above ground within that game. There's very little worth talking about with the kennels other than the manhole that leads down to the sewers from inside them. This is absent from the remake's version of the RPD. The underground parking lot is next. Within the original game we have to help Ada move a paddy wagon in order to reach the cells so she can talk to Ben. Besides that, very little of interest to find within the parking lot. Despite that, this parking lot has been recreated a whole bunch of times. The first recreation is of course on the Gamecom. The biggest difference here is that the police van has become a generic truck of some type. But besides that, it's just a shittier looking version of the parking lot from the original game. During the Umbrella Chronicles, we fight a bunch of Cerberus within the parking lot. Nemesis also turns up, but that's a whole other story that I'll tackle during a possible "How many times has Resident Evil 3 been remade" video. We get a much nicer recreation of this parking lot within the Darkside Chronicles, but there isn't really much to say besides it looks much better than the lazy asset flip that is the Umbrella Chronicles. This parking lot is very different within the remake of Resident Evil 2. First of all, we enter from underground after we've dealt with Birkin's first boss fight. From here, we have to try and find a parking pass in order to exit the RPD from the parking lot. The other interesting thing is that there's a parked car that you can find the key fob to. Although the key is broken, meaning you can't drive the car, you can open the car and find a weapon upgrade part within it. I like this little puzzle. It's always felt nice and diegetic. It makes sense, it's simple. It's just a fun little way to get an upgrade part for one of your guns. I've always just thought it was nice and clever. 30 years later, Leon ends up finding notes from Marvin Branner's daughter, Meryl. Now, one of these notes is left within the abandoned parking lot. We're unable to explore any more of the basement level of the RPD within Requiem since the parking lot is mostly collapsed, blocking all 3 doors leading further into the basement of the station. We do get to see the parking lot within Welcome to Raccoon City, with Chief Irons facing off against a pack of Cerberuses here. But he's ultimately saved by Claire, while Leon stands around being useless like he just does in this film. God, I hate this film, but I love this film! Like, I hate it, yet I find myself endlessly enjoying it at the same time. It's so stupid, and wrong, and bad, and awful, and I think I love it. Now, I could talk about the generator room or the autopsy room, but honestly, there's not that much interesting when exploring the changes between the appearance of the RPD across all of the various appearances it has in the series. Now, don't get me wrong, I love these rooms, they're always a highlight when playing Resident Evil 2, but they don't really have any interesting bits of lore or history, so let's move onwards and downwards into the sewers. While the sewers beneath the RPD have appeared in a bunch of games across the series as a whole, the particular section that we explore within the original Resident Evil 2 game has only ever appeared within that game itself. Every remake of Resident Evil 2 and games that explored the same areas that appeared in Resident Evil 2 have changed the look and layout of the sewers. The three biggest constants are the bridge that raises and lowers that provides us access between two sections of a large central room, the tunnel where we fight the crocodile, and the quote-unquote cable car, you'll see why I said that later, that exits the area. The size of the sewers constantly shifts between their appearances, more often than not getting larger than they were in the original Resident Evil 2. And it's worth noting that the original sewers that we do explore in that original Resident Evil 2 game are really rather small, consisting of a T-junction that enters onto a single ring, with the cable car opening up after we found both medallions from within that ring. This ring tends to feel slightly larger than it actually is, due to a combination of a boss fight being in the middle of it and its multi-level nature. I think the T-junction is the best place to start, since it's where our exploration of the sewers begins within the game. Within the original Resident Evil 2, Claire can pass through this area unaccosted, while poor Leon gets shot in the shoulder defending Ada Wong from Annette Birkin. Now this is all one level within the original Resident Evil 2, but we can see that within the Darkside Chronicles that Annette shoots from a raised level. Now it's hard to say much more about this appearance since we only get to see it within a cutscene, although it is worth mentioning that Claire aids Leon, which only occurs within the Leon A, Claire B scenario in the original game. This T-junction is really nondescript within the remake. Annette now disappears behind a closing door or a hidden wall. It's honestly kinda hard to tell since we only see this door/wall within a cutscene. The next interesting space that we get to is the large central room with the bridge that you have to lower and then raise using the valve handle. I have this really annoying habit of forgetting the valve handle and then having to make a shameful run back to the nearest save room to retrieve it. But despite that, I like this bridge. I like that you have to remember to raise it again after you lower it and cross it the first time, making it more than just a unique lock on a door. Sadly, by the time we get to the Resident Evil 2 remake, that's all it's become. This is made all the worse by the fact that you no longer need the valve handle to lower the bridge, with Leon or Claire simply pulling a nearby lever to lower it and then never needing to raise it again. I hate that one of the few diegetic puzzles within the original Resident Evil 2 has been completely removed in the remake. In my opinion, this really should have been expanded upon with more levels made accessible via the bridge's position, but instead it's reduced to nothing more than a lock with a different animation. Now what I mean by that is within the Resident Evil 2 remake we will find these doors that are locked from one side. This is essentially what this is. We find them, we click the button and then we unlock it and we can move through the door. Now this bridge acts as the same thing. We have to get to it from this side and then we can pull this lever and cross it. And we never have to do anything with it ever again. It is a locked door with a different animation. I mean, technically it's a bridge, but you know what I mean. Functionally, it acts as nothing more than a locked door anymore. Where before, it was a puzzle that you could get wrong that you would have to go back and fix if you forgot to raise it again. It wasn't a complicated puzzle, but it was a puzzle in the original, and now that's been completely removed from the remake. And it's things like this that stop this remake being a slam dunk perfect remake in my opinion. Now we get to my favourite boss fight in the original game, the giant crocodile. When I was a kid, I could only ever get to this boss. I was simply too scared to continue. Now don't get me wrong, the jump scares startled me when I was a kid. They shook me up real good. But they were only ever brief fights, while the crocodile boss fight was something else. It was creepy, haunting in a way that stuck with me after I'd turned the game off. I'm not really sure why. I know it has something to do with the way that it moved towards the screen. Now this is just a guess, this is me psychoanalyzing my child self. I think the fact that it was always moving towards the screen made me as a child feel like it was moving towards me and not the character of Leon or Claire. Like it was this enemy in the video game was a threat to my physical self playing it. That's the only thing I can think of for why this boss freaked me out so much. Now as an adult, I know that this boss fight takes only a single shot from a pistol if you know what to do. It's so easy, it's so simple to defeat. You simply wait until the croc has picked up the explosive canister, and then you shoot the canister, blowing the oversized reptile up. Yet, it legit took me until my teenage years to be able to beat this boss. Resident Evil Uprising features this same crocodile boss, and fun fact, during my playthrough of the game, it led to my only death, because it's an instant death if you walk through the door before you've defeated it. Crafty little thing, you want to make sure you're safe. So you actually have to beat it by crafting a Molotov cocktail and then throwing it from a ledge above the croc. After this, you can pass through the door and get to the cable car. Now, The Dark Side Chronicles is a very faithful recreation of the original boss fight, with Leon and Claire shooting at the crocodile until one of the gas pipes above the creature breaks and the gas explodes from the gunfire, killing the beast. While we do get to run through the tunnels that we fight the crocodile in during the original Resident Evil 2 in the remake, this remake does change the whole boss fight, reducing the gameplay down to simply moving left or right to avoid the big chomps from the oversized murder dinosaur. I like the visuals of this boss fight. The crocodile looks amazing, with it being based off scans of a real-life saltwater crocodile called Wendell from the Crocosaurus Cove in Darwin, Australia. The actual gameplay of this boss fight is lacking though, at least in my opinion. I wish we got to run down the tunnels as the killer croc chased us down like we did in the original. The last thing we need to cover in the sewers are the cable cars, and there really isn't much to say about this cable car apart from pointing out that the cable car in the remake isn't a cable car. This is what I was talking about earlier, the quote-unquote cable car. I'm about to go off here, so like, bleh, but a cable car is a car or carriage that is suspended and moves along a cable, hence the term and the name cable car. Within the original Resident Evil 2, we can see this. We can see that it is a carriage that is suspended and moves along a cable above it. It is a cable car. Within the Resident Evil 2 remake, we have a train. Despite what Leon and Claire say when they see the fucking thing, it is a train. I say this because the car or carriage, whatever you want to call it, runs along tracks on the floor, not a cable. It is a train. Oh, why do they call it a cable car? It's not a cable car. It's just not a cable car. Anyway, with that rant out of the way, let's move on to the train yard at the edge of town. The Trainyard is interesting mostly because it's completely cut from the remake of Resident Evil 2. You see, in the original Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation 1 and every console it was ported to, the cable car didn't take you directly to the Umbrella Lab like it does in the remake. Instead, it takes Leon and Claire to a train yard at the edge of town, and it's from here that both Leon and Claire take this turntable train lift elevator thing down into the Umbrella Lab itself. Now, this train yard didn't just appear within Resident Evil 2 though. It was the connective tissue between the isolated horror of Resident Evil 1's Spencer Mansion and the Arklay Forest, and Resident Evil 2's larger and more crowded horror within Raccoon City proper. And this connection was established within Resident Evil 0, the prequel to the entire series. After several nasty murders with victims partially eaten alive within the Arklay Forest on the edge of Raccoon City, the STARS Bravo team are sent to investigate. Rebecca Chamber finds her way onto a train that takes her to the Umbrella training facility. After she explores this abandoned place, she finds a cable car that takes her to the same train yard that both Leon and Claire find. The only difference is that Rebecca finds herself entering the train yard from within the larger building, whereas Leon and Claire enter from a hatch found in the control room. I love this connection. It tells the story of Umbrella having connected the entire town to this central lab via many hidden cable cars that all lead to this train yard that itself hides a secret entrance to their underground lab. These connections have now been severed with the remake's redesign of the underground lab, which is now called the Nest. We learn that in Resident Evil 3 Remake there is now a second lab called the Nest 2. Then we learn of Umbrella's largest lab called the Ark within Resident Evil 9. This paints a completely different picture of how Umbrella ran their research within Raccoon City. The original games have Umbrella using a central unnamed secret lab under Raccoon City that's connected to every corner of the city via connected cable cars and the above ground train yard. Other facilities, such as the Dead Factory seen in Resident Evil 3 and the training facility seen in Resident Evil 0, serve non-research purposes such as specimen disposal or training future soldiers and scientists. These would be connected to the central lab via the aforementioned cable cars. The remake games now have Umbrella using separate labs known as nests, with each one numbered for BOW and weapons research and development. Within the Nest 1 lab, we see the development of Plant 43 and the various Ivy monsters, as well as the G-Virus and the G-Mutants that spawn from it. Nest 2 shows R&D progress on various T-Virus subject variants, including the Paleheads, as well as the prototype Railgun. While we never see them, there is no saying that there couldn't be more of these Nest labs hidden around Raccoon City. From what we learn in Resident Evil 9, these viruses, BOWs and weapons could then be stored and sold from within the central ARC facility. This is a fascinating change, and if we ever get a Resident Evil 0 remake, which I really hope we do, I would be very interested to see how Capcom and the various devs and writers within Capcom connect the training facility to the other facilities within the remakes. If it was me, I would have the training facility connect to an unseen part of the ARC. This just seems to make sense to me since the ARC now seems to act as the central location for Umbrella underneath Raccoon City. While the Trainyard is now absent from the Resident Evil 2 remake, several moments found there have been folded into other locations now. The Mr. X camera scare has been moved from the Trainyard to the RPD's lobby. The Birkin boss fight has been moved from the Trainyard to the lab, with Claire now fighting Birkin on top of the emergency escape train as it descends to the bottom level of the lab. It's just a shame that we lost such an iconic location, because it's losses like this that really make me wish that the Resident Evil 2 remake was just a little more faithful to the original. Still, let's move on to the last location that we'll be looking at today, the Umbrella Underground Lab. We enter into the underground lab via the train's turntable lowering into place at level B4 of the lab. If we begin our examination of the underground lab at level B4, then I think it's best to look at the central area first. This room has a central platform suspended in the middle of a giant chasm that leads off in 3 directions, north, east and west. We have to fight Mr. X in this central room during the Darkside Chronicles, which is far different to the power room above the vat of molten metal that we fight him in the original Resident Evil 2. Both the Darkside Chronicles and Operation Raccoon City turn this power room into a massive circular room with molten metal flowing around the central platform. The Resident Evil 2 remake, meanwhile, completely removes this area, instead having us fight Mr. X on a descending cargo elevator. After we defeat Mr. X in the B4 central area in the Darkside Chronicles, we end up fighting William Birkin within the same central room. The survivors of Outbreak end up traversing this area, although they find it infested by giant mutated moths. Resident Evil 2's remake has changed this area up even more, but it's still recognisable. The biggest difference are the expanding walkways and the central elevator, but it does just feel like a more modern version of the same area. I really like this change, to be honest. It feels fancy and just more appropriate for the mega corporation that is Umbrella. The area to the north has the train turntable that first lowers us into the lab within the original Resident Evil 2. Rebecca from Resident Evil 0 briefly explores this area. In fact, it's where she has her last ever meeting with Enrico, the captain of the Stars Bravo team, as he leaves the elevator at the west side of the area. She then goes on to fight a prototype Tyrant the other side of the turntable. Meanwhile, the survivors within Resident Evil Outbreak fight a G-Adult on this turntable as it rises up to the Trainyard from earlier. Within the east area, we find a machine that fixes up a fuse for us, allowing us to access the west area. And I know this isn't relevant, but I just love the animation of this fuse being constructed. The animation was recreated within the remake, but instead of the fuse, it's used to create the herbicide to combat Plant 43. We can also find the lab that William Birkin was gunned down in within the east area of the lab. Now, this lab has been seen in a bunch of games. The Dark Side Chronicles shows us it in a flashback cutscene, while Operation Raccoon City has us waiting outside the lab while Hunk and the other operatives enter the lab. We don't really get to see inside the lab because we have to fight off the US military outside the room. What we can tell is that it is most certainly not within the east area of the underground lab that we explore within the original Resident Evil 2. Within the remake we can find William Birkin's lab, but this time it's in the west area as opposed to the east area like in the original. Besides its relocation, the lab is very faithful, I'd say lovingly so. As we move over to the west area, we find Plant 43 and its ivy offshoots that have consumed the area. I love Plant 43. It's a wonderful callback to Plant 42 within the original Resident Evil game. We never really fight this plant in Resident Evil 2, instead we only take on its monstrous spawns, the ivies. This is an example of the remake's monster design falling short in my opinion. See, the original Resident Evil 2, the ivies have this cool humanoid plant aesthetic. They feel like Plant 43 has observed the humans around it and attempted to reproduce them but failed. Then when we get to the remake's ivies, they just look like Plant 42 has seeded human corpses and the plant has grown into the shape of the corpse. I mean, that's cool and all, but it's just nothing on the original design. We do find Plant 43's main body grown alongside a ladder that leads down to the lower levels of the lab, and this is one of Resident Evil 2's most iconic views in my opinion. The sight of Plant 43's massive stem has always stayed with me. We see this same view in Outbreak and it looks just as striking there as well. Which is why it's so strange to find it missing from within the remake. I mean, we do have this ladder during the escape from the lab, but it's only got a few vines and not the massive stem from the original game. The remake has a greenhouse within the east area, and this is where we fight Plant 43 with us needing to create and use a herbicide that kills this version of Plant 43. Now we do see a different instance of Plant 43 within Resident Evil 9 Requiem, and this one is much larger since it's had roughly 30 years to grow, and it acts as a really cool boss fight as Leon enters the ARC facility. If we move down this ladder to level B5 of the lab, we're able to see the monitor room, and this acts as the central location within level B5. While this room is a save room and therefore safe within the original game, Leon and Claire find themselves ambushed by a group of lickers within the Dark Side Chronicles. The Umbrella security operatives of Operation Raccoon City watch Leon's fight with Mr. X and Fairwater Ada on these screens within the monitor room. The remake is one of the few games that really fail to use this room for anything interesting, as you simply run through them during your escape from the nest. Next, we have the giant moth boss fight, and this boss is legit the reason I find moths creepy to this day. You can imagine how happy I was to find out that both Outbreak and the Dark Side Chronicles decided to increase the number of giant moths then. Within the Dark Side Chronicles, they have completely taken over the west side of the B5 level, while in Outbreak they have infested B4's central chamber. The remake completely gets rid of these giant moths, which, despite me finding them so creepy, even to this day I find them creepy, but I still think it's a real shame that we lost them. Within the original Resident Evil 2, Claire, during her A scenario, has to create the vaccine for Sherry. This was completely removed within the remake, with Claire finding the readily created vaccine within the west area of the nest. You do still need to synthesize a vaccine in the remakes though, it's just that now it's been moved to Resident Evil 3's remake instead. Now, on the one hand, I can see why this was done. Within both the original Resident Evil 2 and 3 games, you need to synthesize a vaccine, and these games came out in 1998 and 1999, only a year apart from each other. So, for players at the time, having to do the same thing in 2 games with only a year in between them could have felt a little bit repetitive. Now, to have the Resident Evil 2 remake and the Resident Evil 3 remake both have you needing to synthesize a vaccine, again only a year apart from each other, with one coming out in 2019 and one coming out in 2020, that would again feel repetitive. I get that. But, on the other hand, it does just feel like something's missing from the Resident Evil 2 remake now. I don't know. I feel conflicted about this change. I'm unable to decide whether I think it's a good or a bad change. I do miss having to make the vaccine though. Claire gets the vaccine far too quickly in my opinion. The lab section doesn't last long enough. It feels short. Now the same thing goes for the train that Leon and Claire escape the underground lab on. The original Resident Evil 2 has two major trains. The one that we descend into the lab with and we fight William Birkin on, and the one that we escape the lab in and we fight his final form on. These are two trains that we fight two different forms of Birkin on. It is repetitive. The remake removes the Trainyard and it folds the content into the second train. This does make a bit of sense. We have the same Birkin boss fight, but whereas in the original game this fight is on the Trainyard turntables train, in the remake it's on the escape train. The Dark Side Chronicles was the first game to really remove that first train on the turntable. While we do get to see it in the background of certain scenes within the Dark Side Chronicles, we have no boss fights on it, and at no point do we ever really use it in that game. The remake just went the extra mile and removed the entire train and Trainyard. And to be honest, I do get why they removed it, because after all, why have two trains? But yeah, like with the vaccine, with the first train removed from the remake, it feels like something is missing. I love this remake, and I know for those that didn't grow up with the original Resident Evil 2, this is a non-issue. But I did grow up with the original Resident Evil 2, and I can't help but regret that we didn't get these iconic moments of the original game in the remake. It feels like something's missing, and I think that's a shortcoming of the remake, if I'm honest. We have objectively less content in it. I know we got the orphanage, but I mean, come on. That forced stealth section with Sherry is just the worst part of the remake, so that's not a replacement for any of these. That's just... oh god, I hate that bit. It is also worth mentioning that both Resident Evil Uprising and Welcome to Raccoon City feature this underground lab, but their versions of this lab are so vastly different to the version that we see in the game that there's really no way to make a comparison to it in any fair way. So I just want to take a moment to talk about the book and the board game separately, because they didn't really fit into these comparisons, and I do think they are worth talking about. So let's move on to those. City of the Dead is part of the wider S.D. Perry Resident Evil universe. To be precise, it's the third book in a series of 7 books. While these novels retell the events of Resident Evils 0, 1, 2, 3 and Code Veronica, they also include narrative events original to this version of the Resident Evil universe. This can be seen mostly within the 2 completely original novels, Caliban Cove and Underworld, but also within the finer details of the novels retelling the events from the games. For example, during Resident Evil The Umbrella Conspiracy, the novel that retells the events of Resident Evil 1, Jill Valentine is given a PDA with information on the Spencer Mansion and the puzzles found within it by a mysterious man only known as Trent. This acts as a way for Jill to collect, store, and view the files and maps that players of Resident Evil 1 would expect Jill to find within the Spencer Mansion. It's a nice diegetic way to recreate the gameplay. It's such a good idea, in fact, that Welcome to Raccoon City straight up just copied the idea. It's now Wesker getting the PDA, but it is the same idea. Wesker gets a PDA with the same sort of data on it that Jill finds within the novel. Now, this Trent character that gives Jill the PDA continues to play a key role throughout the S.D. Perry novels, with his identity and purpose for helping our heroes being the central mystery that connects all of these stories together. The biggest difference within City of the Dead, when compared to the original Resident Evil 2, is that it opens with Jill Valentine as opposed to Leon or Claire. We follow the surviving stars as they flee Raccoon City. It's only after they fled the city that we move over to Leon and Claire entering the titular City of the Dead. Ada Wong is no longer working for Wesker and the Connections as she does within the games within this universe. She's now working for Trent, and we follow Ada's point of view in several chapters, and as such, we get more of an insight into her personality and goals. This alone gives City of the Dead a unique angle when comparing it to all of the other Resident Evil remakes. We find out that after all of the cruel and malice acts that Ada's seen during her years as a corporate spy, she's beginning to find herself worn down emotionally. This is why she ends up forming such an instant and genuine bond with the well-meaning rookie cop Leon. He's the complete opposite to everything within the cutthroat and vicious world that Ada's used to. In a violent nightmare like Raccoon City, Leon becomes Ada's ray of hope, one that she risks her life for despite her better judgment. The events that Leon and Claire experience are also not strictly the Leon A, Claire B, or Claire A, Leon B scenarios from the original game, as the novel combines these events to get something completely unique. As somebody that knows the events of this game like the back of their hand, this does keep the narrative interesting, even for us veterans that like to think we know what's going to happen next. Overall, this novel, and the entire series that it belongs to, is very much worth reading if you're a Resident Evil fan. Which, as you've made it over 2 hours into a Resident Evil deep dive video, I'm guessing you are. These books can be found pretty cheap on eBay, but they're even cheaper if you want the audiobook versions, as they're available for free on the Residents of Evil YouTube channel. Now I'll make sure to leave a link in the description of this video, and I'll add a link to the playlist at the end of this video when all the recommendations come up. And if I figure out how to do it, I'll also tag them in the top right of the video now. With City of the Dead and the S.D. Perry novelizations covered, let's move on to looking at the other unique remake of Resident Evil 2, the Resident Evil 2 board game. I do own the Resident Evil board game physically, and I have played it before, and I very much plan to play it again. In fact, I plan to play it in a couple of weeks when the group I play board games with finish the Stardew Valley board game. Despite this, for the sake of footage for this video, I've captured a single player campaign on Tabletop Simulator using the amazing Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3 mod on Steam Workshop, made by the amazing creators Cyber Jesus, Tofu, and Epiphany Furcat. Honestly, this mod is amazing, and if you've got Tabletop Simulator and you want to check out this board game, I would recommend playing it there if you can, because it's just a very, very good way to play it. Now, I'm not gonna lie and say that I'm a massive lover of board games, as there are certainly folk out there that have played more board games than myself and play them more regularly than myself. That being said, I'm also more than a casual enjoyer of them at the same time. I have a group of friends I meet up with every couple of weeks, and we play board games for a few hours before we all inevitably need to return to life as adults. I've played the Fallout board game, the Stardew Valley board game, the D&D Castle Ravenloft board game, as well as the board game classics such as Settlers of Catan and Dwarf Romantic, among a few others. What I'm trying to explain is, while I'm not an expert on the subject of board games, I'm also not a novice. All in all, I would pretty much consider myself to be a rather average player when it comes to this subject matter. So, that being said, let's talk about the main subject matter here, the Resident Evil 2 board game. Now, the Resident Evil board game is an entertaining game, a very fun one, but it has one major flaw. And sadly, this flaw is so large that it just reduces the rest of the game down to a mere curiosity, one that, at least for myself, will not end up as part of the usual board game rotation. It's not up to that level. Now, like most of the more complex board games, those generally above the Monopoly level, this game is playable in single player, but can be expanded to up to 4 total players. Now, all these players work together against the threat of the outbreak itself, meaning that if one player wins, so do they all, and if one player loses, then so do all the players. This is a big plus to me because cooperative games have always been my favourite. So, like I say, big plus in my book. The Resident Evil 2 board game is playable in 2 ways. Either the short scenarios or the much longer multi-session campaign mode, which takes you through a bunch of scenarios one after the other. If you only have the base game, then you'll be playing through the A scenarios, all 8 of them. Now this A campaign follows the basic flow of the original Resident Evil 2 game, with Leon, Claire, Ada and Kendo all fighting their way through the story of Resident Evil 2. Scenario 1A, the beginning one, starts with our heroes on the streets of Raccoon City trying to make it into the RPD. This scenario is a fantastic start to the game, as it shows how long or short each scenario can be. And this is because you can either search every room for useful items, or you can simply rush to the end of the scenario. The first issue with the game starts with the difference between playing a single scenario and the campaign. If you're playing a single scenario, then there is very little reason to waste time searching for items, as any extra ammo, herbs or keys you find will be useless when you finish the scenario. Playing the single player scenario modes sees players starting with a preset inventory for each scenario, one that is very generous when it comes to weapons and ammo. So unless you get very unlucky on the dice throws, you should be fine playing these. Meanwhile, while playing the campaign sees you enter every scenario with the same inventory and health that you left the last one with. Now what this means is that searching the environment for extra ammo and healing supplies is vital in the campaign mode. Even more so than in the actual video game this is based on, since unlike the original Resident Evil 2, you can't return to these areas once you've left them. If you leave any useful gear behind in a scenario, then it is gone forever in this board game, which means that you really do need to search for items when playing this campaign mode. On the flip side of this, you really don't need to bother when playing these single scenarios. Unless you have a dedicated group to play this with, then the odds are you will probably only be playing these single scenarios, since the campaign can take around 8 to 10 hours to finish if you include the setup and pack away times. I'd basically compare its length to a shorter TTRPG campaign. The setup and pack away times are something that I'd like to talk about. This is a game with a lot of pieces, cards, tokens and so on. While it's not the most complex game to play, it does have a lot of stuff needed to play it. What this means is that it takes a fair while to set up each scenario. I'd say between 15 to 30 minutes per scenario. Longer if you're new to it and you're not 100% sure what you're doing. Now, the scenarios can last anywhere between 20 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how many people are playing and the playstyle you play with. If you have 1 to 2 players playing a single scenario, only finding the essential items and then running to the end tile or boss fight, then it's possible to spend more time setting up and packing away the game than you actually spend playing it. Which is a problem in my opinion. It's a massive problem, and this is that massive flaw I mentioned at the start of this section. You also have the problem that if you're playing with a group of 4 friends and only one is familiar with the game, then they, which is normally me, end up setting up each scenario on their own, since they're the only ones that know how to do so without reading the rules every couple of seconds to make sure they're doing it correctly. And this tends to mean that for every 15 to 30 minutes per scenario, you're just left doing something on your own. Another massive downside to this board game. Ultimately, it is this setup and pack away times that kill the hype of this game. If you're only playing a single scenario, then you can end up spending longer organising the board than playing the game. If you're playing the campaign, then the momentum of all the gameplay is ruined, because every hour or so you need to stop playing to clear away the old scenario and set up the new one. I really do wish this wasn't the case, because when you're playing this game, it's great, it's fantastic, it's genuinely one of the better board games I've played. Even more so if you have a couple of Resident Evil fans among you. The gameplay is fantastic. It's just that this gameplay is constantly put on pause so that you can reorganize the board for the next bit of fun, thus killing any momentum that was built up throughout the gameplay. I really do hate that the most unique remake of Resident Evil 2 is marred by such a massive flaw. But sadly, that's the reality of it, that's the case. Anywho, let's wrap this video up with my final thoughts. how do I wrap up a video this massive that's covered so much? I think a good way would be to rank every game we've looked at on a tier list, because that's fun. So, first off, looking at this tier list, the original Resident Evil 2 and 3, and I mean, damn! They're out and out classics! They've stood the test of time, and they're still as good today as they were 28 years ago. So of course, they're both S rank. They just had to be. Now, up second are the Outbreak games. Oh, if you had an internet modem for your PS2 back in the day, then you got to experience true S-tier Resident Evil. Oh, but now the servers are down and these are only single player games which were designed for multiplayer, which does reduce its ranking. But only a little, since the scenarios still prove to be a lot of fun even when playing on your own. So, these two games sit pretty at A rank. Up next are the two films that we've looked at today. Welcome to Raccoon City. Oh, this is a truly awful film, but one that I love. But it is awful. But I love it. But it's awful, so it sits near the bottom at D rank. Now, Resident Evil Apocalypse is also pretty bad, but I find that it's kind of like the Fast and the Furious films. It's dumb fun, so it sits just one rank higher than Welcome to Raccoon City at C rank. Now, the Resident Evil 2 board game has a frustrating start and stop campaign that dampens what could have been an all-time great. As it is, this entry sits comfy at B rank. Moving on, Resident Evil Uprising is next, our first of two mobile games. This one was a Java remake of Resident Evil 2 for 2009 phones, and it's an impressive little remake, one that's more fun than I really thought it was going to be. That being said, it is a little on the short side, so it lands next to the board game at B rank. The second mobile game, running on much newer tech including modern smartphones, which you would think means it rises above the outdated Uprising, but no, it doesn't. The pay-to-win bullshit of modern mobile game wankery keeps this down low firmly at the bottom in F rank. Now, City of the Dead, the only novel in our tier list, it's a fascinating read, it's an interesting piece of Resident Evil history, but it is also far from being a literary classic. I don't really think it's trying to be. It is just a fun little schlocky read, one that could have been better, but is still fun, and it sits at a respectable B rank. Next up, Operation Raccoon City, and this starts strong with a really solid premise. A what-if scenario where you play as the bad guys, Umbrella operatives, sent into Raccoon City to make sure that the outbreak goes their way. This should have been great. It could have been great, but sadly a rushed production led to what can only be described as a lackluster game, one that can be fun if you're in the right headspace, but is still really lacking. So it's not down at the bottom, it's just below the middle at C rank. Resident Evil 0, which is the only prequel the series has ever got, and one that really did try something new with the co-op gameplay between Rebecca and Billy. This new idea sadly wasn't really a hit and didn't really work. It left the player with too much backtracking as the universal item chests were now removed, meaning that you had to run back to wherever you left a key item. And let's face it, that was always the fucking grapple hook. We always left that motherfucker miles away and had to spend 5-10 minutes running across the entire map just to pick it up. No enemies in our way anymore, just pure backtracking. And that dampened what should have been a classic Resident Evil game. And it is still a classic Resident Evil game. It does deserve to stand up there with those classics. It just stands a little shorter than its peers. Therefore, it comes in at B rank. Now, the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes? Oh god, these are good games. They're so much fun to play and you can really feel the love that went into recreating these two classic stories. Some real genuine thought has been put into how they play together, with repeated actions such as creating the T-virus vaccine in Resident Evil 3 and the G-virus vaccine in Resident Evil 2, or the two stalker enemies in Mr. X and Nemesis reduced where possible. Now you only create the vaccine in one game, Resident Evil 3, and you only have a stalker enemy in one game, Resident Evil 2, meaning that when you play them together, they really do work as a pair. The downside of that is that we sadly lost a little bit too much when all of that stuff was trimmed away. So while these remakes are great, they sit just below S rank at an A rank. Now let's bring things right back down to the dirt with a real stinker. The Umbrella Corps. Oh! This was one of the worst RE games even when the servers were online. Now it's a dead game as well as a terrible one. This is the very definition of F rank. Meanwhile, Resident Evil 9 is an instant classic. While this game may not be hot off the presses, it's still warm off them. So my love of this game may only be recency bias, but right now all I can say is that this is a solid S-ranked Resident Evil game. Just be aware, as the newest game on this tier list, it is the most likely to shift in its ranking as time passes. Last up, the absolute goddamn worst for last, the Gamecom remake. And I hate to say that because it's an impressive piece of coding. The little handheld that couldn't really had no right fitting an entire Resident Evil 2 scenario on it. And the fact that these devs managed to fit Leon's entire scenario on the Gamecom is nothing short of amazing. I am awestruck that they managed it. But, like Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park, they spent so long wondering if they could, they never stopped to think if they should, and I have to say, they really shouldn't have, because Resident Evil 2 on the Gamecom is a pure F. I'd say the only game worse than it is the Umbrella Corps, and that's mostly because it's a completely dead game now, you basically can't play it. I would say Resident Evil 2 on the Gamecom is the worst game that is still playable today. It is bad. But there we go, all the games, films and novels that we've looked at in this massive video, all ranked. I have to say, I really hated the Gamecom remake of Resident Evil 2. I love the original RE2 so much that I didn't think I could really dislike a port of it as much as I ended up hating the Gamecom port of Resident Evil 2. It controls like arse, it sounds even worse, and the graphics, if they can even be called that, reduce the RPD and the surrounding areas of Raccoon City to a gross mess of black and white pixels. I also need to make a bit of a confession here. I didn't manage to beat this perversion of classic gaming. I tried. I really tried. I did. I tried to get the emulator working natively on my computer, but I couldn't. So instead, I ended up putting hours upon hours into the emulator that I found on the Internet Archive, and that wasn't enough. After I died multiple times for hours on end, I tried to resort to save states, something that I tend not to do when I play on emulators. But I found that these wiped every time I refreshed the Internet Archive webpage I had up. And I tell you what, that broke something in me. Realising I got a decent amount through, gone away for a sanity break from this piece of shit game, only to come back and realise I've lost all that progress. Yeah, in the end I gave up. I put my hands up. I do not have it in me to beat this game without saves. So yeah, I ended up giving up. I ended up studying a VOD I found on YouTube from a user called Mr. Goonen VOD. What a lovely name. Now, the wonderful Mr. Goon proved himself to be a far more resilient gamer than myself, and he beat the entire game. I will, of course, leave a link to his VOD that I watched in the description of this video if you want to go watch that for yourself. He managed something I couldn't. To move away from the worst game, the game that ended up surprising me the most when doing the research for this video was Resident Evil Uprising. Now, I'd played the Java demake of the Resident Evil 1 remake, which is the predecessor to this game. It came out before this one, Resident Evil Genesis, if you're wondering is what it's called. And while I did enjoy it a little bit, just for the novelty of it, I never really ended up clicking with it. But for whatever reason, I really found myself clicking with Resident Evil Uprising. I mean, I found myself beating this in one sitting. That's not saying too much, as it's only really 2 to 3 hours long for first blind playthrough. But I really did end up enjoying myself. I mean, I really did. I genuinely think I will revisit this game one day because it's that much fun. In the same way that I plan on revisiting Resident Evil Genesis soon on the GBA game. Because they're very similar and they're both a really interesting take on the Resident Evil formula. And I'll be honest, that's not something I thought I'd say about a Java demake of Resident Evil 2 going into this video. So if you can get like the proper emulator and all that working, or you have an old phone that you can get this game working on, Resident Evil Uprising is honestly fucking solid. And with that, I genuinely think we're done here. After hours talking about Resident Evil 2, I've talked all I can. I've talked about all of the Resident Evil 2 remakes in so much depth that even my autistic ass is out of things to talk about. So the only thing I need to say before we leave this video off is, please remember that I'm a new YouTuber and I'm still a small one. So each like, hype, comment or subscription really does mean a lot to me. With that, I hope you enjoy the recommended videos that will be popping up on your screen, including the Resident Evil audiobooks from Residents of Evil here on YouTube. And genuinely just thank you so much for watching. I mean, damn! You made it through my longest video yet, easily my longest video yet. So like, if you're here at the end, then wow. Thank you so much, you're a real one. So yeah, with that, I will see you in my next video, or in one of my old ones if you end up watching one of them. Thank you very much. Goodbye.